Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy got massive harem with everyone in his universe? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the peenutbutterjell-o for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Now, as we all could probably recall, our endearingly simple-minded Captain Monkey D. Luffy ate a Gomu Gomu fruit, which not only altered him physically to become a man made of rubber, it also affected his internal organs and how they worked. Or failed to work, in some cases. Seriously, how is it possible for someone to lack that much common sense? Perhaps the inability for rubber to conduct electricity efficiently has something to do with his brain processing information as slow as a student trudging to school on a Monday morning. And don't even get me started on his lack of interest toward some of the hottest female characters ever made up in anime history. Now, if I had my way, none of that would be the case. I'll make Luffy eat a totally different devil fruit and find himself inexplicably attracted to a certain red-eater raven-haired beauty because for s sakes, which pubescent teen won't find them sizzling hot. But damn it all to hell, I don't. Oh wait. This is my story. Which means that I actually can have my way with them. Heh. That was me rubbing my hands together with somewhat psychotic glee. See, I have this whole thing planned out in my mind. Shanks' crew is going to stumble upon a devil fruit unlike one they've ever seen before and… you know what? How about we start from the very beginning of the story? Sit back, relax and enjoy as I tell you peeps my version of the epic adventure known to all of us as One Piece. Devil fruits. Said to be the work of the sea devil himself, these natural occurring fruits which bestow mystical powers to whoever or whatever consumes them could be found scattered all over the many islands across the world. They are found in larger, more concentrated quantities along the infamous Grand Line, so encounters with these mystical fruits are rare outside of that treacherous stretch of sea, gifting them with a hefty price tag in the black market. Devil fruits come in all shapes, sizes and colors and are most easily recognized by the swirly patterns or marks covering them. They are also rumored to taste awfully bad, so much so that ingesting one feels akin to poisoning oneself. However, the horrid aftertaste is a small price to pay, considering the special traits one would acquire upon consumption of the fruit. There's an estimated 100-odd known devil fruit powers, and if it wasn't before, it has become painfully obvious that these fruits are not made equal. Certain devil fruits' powers have a distinct advantage over their counterparts, especially so with Logia-class devil fruits. Considered the rarest of all, they grant immunity against almost all typical physical blows, as they bestow the users with the ability to transform their whole body into natural elements at will. Phasing their physical body into particles of the element before reforming back into their original self. Due to the near limitless potential of harnessing such a fearsome power, Logia-class fruits are firmly seated at the top of the devil fruit hierarchy. There are two more types of devil fruits, the Zone and Paramecia classes. The former allows the user to shift fully, typically into an animalistic form, depending on the fruit's model, or partially into a hybrid of man and beast. Generally regarded as the weakest of the devil fruits due to its old prowess in close combat while in beast form, there's a subclass that single-handedly changed the public's opinion of these fruits' potential. The mythical Zone fruits. They allow their hosts to transform into legendary creatures so devastatingly powerful their names are whispered with equal parts reverence and fear. Sadly, aforementioned fruits are getting increasingly sparse now and are thought to have vanished off the face of the world. Lastly, the Paramecia class fruits. These fruits do not appear to grant a specific range of powers like the previous two, in fact, they have the widest range of abilities from downright ridiculous to utterly overwhelming. To put it simply, these fruits present to their hosts every other supernatural ability besides for those encompassed within the Logia and Zone fruit circle. Despite the enormous gaps in power between different classes of fruits, the abilities of devil fruits were only limited to their users' imagination and creativity. Hence, it wasn't uncommon to see someone who ate a lower-class Paramecia fruit to triumph over a Logia class considered to be far more superior. Such was the law of this jungle. Things were going just swell until something, or more specifically, someone caught the Sea Devil's attention. See, the Sea Devil was very much real, he just preferred to reside in a different realm as it watched over its territory with indifference, having not been pressed into action once. He had watched on as the ancient Oharans planted the tree of knowledge and bore witness to how it flourished and grew over the years. He had watched on as the city of gold was built, leading to great prosperity for its people. He had merely watched on as weapons of mass destruction were assembled, amused by the stupidity of these lower life forms and their never-ending tendency to eradicate their own existence. He had watched on as the sea slowly reshaped islands through erosion, as the early inhabitants of the world started to take to the seas in a bid to explore his world. Not once had he thought to interfere with the happenings. What was the point? The lives of humans were so short and insignificant, like that of a firefly in comparison to him. In the blink of its eye, what used to be an exuberant child would have aged into a frail, sickly old man. But the ability to take on any form as he so pleased, the sea devil had spent the past few centuries or so shifting from form to form, from ancient aquatic creatures slumbering at the bottom of the sea, to beasts roaming the wildlands and a human that had earned its favor with his amusing antics. Montblanc Nolland was his name. That was the form the sea devil had sustained for close to 400 years. Now, however, he was sporting a form more familiar to us. The towering beast of a man, his most prominent feature was his black curved mustache. On his head sat a red pirate hat with a Jolly Roger that would have sent most men into a terror-induced flurry. A long red captain's coat was pulled over a simple blue shirt and grey pants. Goldie Roger. The second man to have ever piqued its interest. The Sea Devil had been sorely disappointed when he was executed by the Marines for a long time. His journey throughout the Grand Line and then to Raftel had been its only source of entertainment. Thankfully, the execution set into motion a sequence of events that led to the dawning of a new age of pirates, and excitement flooded his entire being at the number of ships once again traversing the wide expanse of sea, all in search of the ultimate treasure, the One Piece, discovered and left behind by the Pirate King himself. This new age also meant that devil fruits, his proudest creation, were in high demand. The Sea Devil had never particularly paid attention to the consumption of them, or who by, there simply were too many to keep track of. All but one. The Yami no Mi, otherwise more commonly known as the dark fruit. Devil fruits weren't created as equals. He had ensured that by sealing tiny pieces of varying concentration of his being into these fruits, before letting nature decide each and every one of their innate ability. This fruit, however, bestowed powers that pushed at boundaries never meant to be tested, defying the laws of mortality itself. Darkness had the ability to corrupt absolutely. That fruit was a mistake. The little fragment of himself the Sea Devil had imparted into the fruit, far more concentrated than originally intended. It stood above all the others as the strongest devil fruit. It had no rival. To make matters worse, the man that had found and consumed it was wreaking havoc and leaving destruction in his trail wherever he went. Blackbeard's mind was deranged and filled with so much misdirected self-righteousness, no doubt due to the darkness within him, that he could no longer tell right from wrong. Put simply, he had become a threat that needed to be neutralized. Normally, he wouldn't give two hoots what went down in the world. As the saying goes, humans are the architect of their own destruction. This time was different. He had caused this problem with his oversight, and he intended to remove the cause of it from the face of the earth. The Sea Devil regarded the new devil fruit in his hands with a tenderness one would save solely for his or her newborn. After all, it had taken quite a curious blend of circumstances, as well as a sizable chunk of his being to produce such a marvel. Furthermore, for the first and last time he also implanted a sentience into the fruit. That's something he dared to do purely due to the unpredictable personality of the sentient being residing within the devil fruit. More often than not, they end up having a frighteningly merciless nature with a formidable drive to boot. They are devils after all, and they definitely live up to their name. This particular fruit looked like none of its kin. Elongated and bright red, it resembled the shape of a crescent moon. The swirly patterns that adorned it weren't evenly distributed, but in much higher proportion in the middle of the body, and sparse near the either ends, because of the centralized location of the sentience. It was time to put his plan into motion. He needed a capable host, one that would be able to control and tame the overwhelming power of the energy fruit in his hands. The candidate he had chosen out of the many was none other than Shanks, the red-haired pirate with impressive willpower and a natural flair at swordplay. He, along with his crew of misfits, had made their way through the Grand Line and then the New World without the aid of a devil fruit. And if for some ludicrous reason that wasn't enough to persuade the Sea Devil, the fact that at this very moment his crew was in possession of a random devil fruit which could be easily swapped out with the energy fruit would have tilted the scales in his favor. Here we go, the Sea Devil grinned as the devil fruit dematerialized, only to be replaced with a smaller, rounder one. The real fun begins now. Opopop, my very special, unique way of line breaking. Noflamepels. The little town known as Fuchsia Village along the East Blue was in full bustle, as expected whenever the red-haired pirates came to pay a friendly visit. Business all over was blooming as the pirates patronized different stores, making their usual rounds around town. The streets were crowded with locals and pirates alike, the former gathered to get their hands on any juicy piece of gossip they could coax out of the hardy pirates about their latest trip into the infamous Grand Line. The modestly sized inn was filled to damn near bursting, but nobody gave a rat's ass. The celebration was in full swing, boisterous drunken laughter and the raucous partying of the patrons could be heard from miles away. Barrels of ale and plates piled high with food were being polished off faster than one could blink, and according to a certain red-haired captain sitting at the counter, the party was just getting started. Shanks. A young boy around the age of 10 with jet black hair tugged repeatedly at the sleeves of his shirt to gain his attention. I want to tell you something very important. Iridi downed his drink in a single gulp before regarding the adolescent boy he had come to consider a friend with a wry smile. What is it, Luffy? Wait. Luffy's lips thinned into a line. Promise me you'll take me seriously first. I promise. Narrowed eyes peered back at him in suspicion. You better not be lying. I can tell when you're being dishonest, you know. I've always been taking you seriously, Luffy. Nah. Liar. Last year, I asked to join your crew and you just laughed it off. Shanks chuckled fondly at that memory. Luffy had gotten so worked up that day because of his purposefully vague answer, he had thrown a tantrum that would have made God contemplate murder. I just told you that the time wasn't right. The child puffed out his cheeks in irritation. I'm ready to go on an adventure with you, Shanks. I have been training with Gramps, I'm strong. You'll totally regret it if you don't recruit me into your crew right now. The Grand Line is not a place just anybody can sail to, Shanks admonished, albeit without any real steel behind his words, even experienced sailors disappear without a trace. But Luffy was cut off mid-sentence by the noisy and overtly dramatic entrance of a teenage boy with a mop of bright pink hair into the inn, echoing Shanks' name over and over again. Frantic eyes scanned the interior of the building, and the relief on his face was obvious when the young pirate spotted his captain among the rowdy crowd. Scampering over, his breathing ragged and choppy as if he'd been sprinting his entire way here, he hunched over, hands on his thighs as he took a few seconds to catch his breath and regain his bearings. The moment he was capable of speech, he straightened and saluted Shanks, the words leaving his mouth in a panicked jumble. Captain Shanks. I'm sorry I took so long. The devil fruit appraiser was out for lunch and he didn't return until barely 10 minutes ago and I urged him to hurry up, but… Kobe. Shanks interrupted gently with an amused shake of his head, placing a hand on the close to hyperventilating boy's shoulder. Calm down. There's no need to explain to me anything. I'm not like your previous captain. A flash of anger so profound it reflected in the darkening of his eyes, and I will not hurt you. The pink-haired pirate released a shuddering breath, nodding shakily. Thank you, Captain. Shanks smiled, all traces of animosity gone, and lifted the refilled tankard up to his lips to take a small sip of ale. So what did the appraiser say about the fruit? He said that he had never seen a devil fruit like that before. The shape, the color, it's never been documented before. It also has a strange smell. Hey, you guys have a devil fruit right now? Luffy obviously couldn't hold back his growing excitement any longer and interrupted with an awestruck expression on his face. Can I see it? I want to see it. He started jumping up and down on his seat. Please let me see it. The young pirate Kobe acquiesced to his request after glancing towards Shanks for his approval. Reaching into the small pouch slung around his shoulders, he pulled out a fruit unlike anything Luffy had seen in his life. It was curved and long. Luffy's first thought was that it looked like the moon hanging high up in the sky at night. The most prominent feature, however, was not the shape but its color, bright red, like that of freshly drawn blood. Luffy rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing things? The swirling and eddying pattern seemed to be coalescing into a whole of some sort. Different colors swam across his vision, and he felt his temples start to throb incessantly. The hair on his arms were on end, and there was a low hum in his ears, confusing his senses. Eat me? Luffy blinked rapidly. What the hell was going on? He was only mildly aware of what was happening around him, the din from the rest of Shanks' crew as they continued partying behind him, and the red-haired captain himself engaged in conversation with Kobe, who was gesturing animatedly. Then his gaze fell on the neglected devil fruit placed atop of the bar counter, easily within reaching distance. Stop resisting. Slowly, everything around him faded to black. The hum was getting louder, quickly becoming all he could hear. A part of Luffy dimly registered that this felt like the calm before the storm, when static charges were saturated in the air. Just a small bite. One bite will do. Luffy nodded mutely, conceding to the words in his head. It made so much sense. He was hungry, and the fruit will satisfy his needs. The crescendo of noise was gradually reaching its peak as he extended his hand outwards. Before he knew it, he had the fruit in his grasp and was lifting it up to his mouth, already anticipating the burst of flavor. Yes. So close. The next sequence of events appeared to take place in ultra-slow motion. Kobe shouted in alarm when he noticed that the fruit was missing and jabbed a finger in his direction before pushing off on his heels in a lunge with a soundless scream. Shanks whirled around, the panic on his face evident as his mouth moved to form words warning and ordering him to put the devil fruit down. Crunch. Kobe's body collided with him, and the impact knocked him off his perch on the chair. The pair sailed through the air in an almost comical manner, the barely eaten fruit in one direction and them in another. Finally, The last thing Luffy heard before he lost consciousness was a loud, maniacal cackling within his head and a worrying feeling that his life was about to get very, very complicated. Oh, and that the fruit tasted absolutely horrible. Oh pop. The sea devil, upon witnessing the fiasco, promptly face-palmed. Now he understood why humans felt the need to carry out that. Damn it, Luffy. Shanks shouted irritably, holding up the boy in question with one hand gripping the top of his head. What in the world possessed you to eat the devil fruit? Luffy, his arms crossed and lips puckered into a pout, refused to answer and just looked away from him while hanging in midair. The rest of Shanks' crew had stopped carousing for a moment in favor of observing the trio and their captain's reaction to losing a devil fruit. When it became apparent that nothing of overt interest was going to happen, they groaned in unison and resumed drinking and making merry. The red-haired captain wasn't quite done with Luffy yet, however. Do you know what this means? You can't swim or float anymore. You're literally going to sink all the way to the bottom of the sea if you so much as fall off a boat. And, to make matters worse, the devil fruit you just ate is unidentified. We have no idea what power it possesses. It could be something as useless as the Hito no Mi, which is a human fruit absolutely useless when consumed by a human. Kobe, sitting on the seat previously occupied by Luffy, nodded furiously in agreement before wincing as it aggravated his headache caused by the concussion he suffered from tackling the quiet and sullen boy next to him. Now, in the best case scenario, you got lucky and ate a fruit with decent powers. This brings in yet another problem, Hunters. Translated to be demon hunters, they're essentially devil fruit hunters. They are a group of extraordinarily strong ex-pirates who switched professions after realizing how much more lucrative it was to hunt down and exterminate people with demon fruit powers and capture the powers into another fruit before selling it off to the highest bidder. Shanks paused, finally letting Luffy down and placing him on the bar counter. You have no idea what you just got yourself into, boy. This is an entirely new world we're talking about here. Only the strongest survive. After being silent and prone for possibly the longest time ever in his life, Luffy sent a scathing look at him. Then train me to become stronger, Shanks. I want to be a pirate like you too. It's not so easy. Why not? Because Luffy, Shanks explained slowly, wearily, it takes years for you to master your devil fruit power, assuming that it's not something utterly useless. Furthermore, don't your gramps want you to become a marine? Kobe visibly perked up at the mention of the marines. Luffy pulled a face. Don't wanna. Marines are boring. Kobe audibly gasped, causing both of them to turn to regard him. Blushing, he gesticulated wildly. It's nothing. Don't pay any attention to me. Oh, that's right. Shanks smiled, patting the pink-haired boy on the head affectionately. Kobe here wants to join the marines. Luffy studied him with squinted eyes as if he was a never-seen-before alien life form. You're dumber than you look, Pinky. Hey. Shanks laughed. Now, let's both agree to disagree, shall we? Kobe and Luffy glared at each other briefly before turning away with identical annoyed expressions. Anyway, Shanks continued thoughtfully, tapping against his chin with a finger, do you feel different, Luffy? Your powers, if you have any, should have kicked in by now. The raven-haired boy's reaction to his question was to poke and tug at every single part of his body before attempting numerous stunts that just left him panting and out of breath, all to no avail. Red face and gasping for air, Luffy glumly plopped back down on his seat and sighed loudly. I don't feel any different and I can't do any cool new stuff that I couldn't before. All of a sudden, he brightened up like a light bulb switched on. Oh wait, I nearly forgot. Immediately, his facial features scrunched up into that of immense concentration and his hands balled into fists on the table. A second passed, then 2, then 5. Shanks raised an eyebrow, not exactly certain what to expect. Kobe, who was pointedly ignoring Luffy up until then, also glanced over reluctantly. They didn't have to wait much longer though, as Luffy rewarded their patience with a soft belch that could hardly be heard over the din. His absolutely crestfallen look made Shanks burst out into laughter. I was so sure that was going to be it. He grumbled to no one in particular before drowning his disappointment in a glass of orange juice. That's the power you want. The ability to burp loudly. Luffy stuck a tongue out at him upon hearing his incredulous tone. At least it's better than nothing. Bleh. You know, Luffy, it's not a bad thing to not have a devil fruit power. I don't have one, and I'm doing just fine. Sometimes, it can prove to be more of a liability than an asset, especially when you don't even know what it is. Shanks said sagely, nodding in gratitude when Makino, the bartender, refilled his tankard with ale. Let's just hope that it'll suddenly pop up and reveal itself sooner rather than later. And just as the last word of the sentence left Shanks' mouth, there were a few shouts of warning from the other end of the inn, and from the corner of his eye, Shanks caught a glimpse of a poorly aimed dart sailing through the air, with Luffy plainly in its trajectory. And for the second time in the span of a few minutes, everything went into slow motion. Shanks knew he was too late to knock the dart out of the air or shove Luffy out of the way, but that didn't stop him from trying to save the oblivious boy from injury. He reached out with his right hand, at the same time watching with abject horror as the dart, turning and twisting in the air, found its mark with unerring precision. Before just phasing through, the boy in question sighed harmlessly and dropping immediately onto the ground with a solid thunk, as if it lost all momentum. Luffy exclaimed in bewilderment, looking to his left and right so fast that it was a miracle he didn't get whiplash. What was that sound? His eyes went down to his torso, a slight frown marring his features. And why does my body feel all tingly? It couldn't be. Shanks was staring at the clueless boy who was petting his abdominal area furiously, presumably to try and recreate the sensation he felt seconds ago with his mouth agape. That boy had a Logia-class power. He shook his head. Not possible. When the dart had passed through his body, Shanks hadn't seen any elemental shifting of the targeted area. It appeared more as if the dart had been sucked into the body before exiting, albeit without any of its former speed. It was like Luffy had absorbed all of its energy before spitting it back out. What kind of ability was that? Off the top of his head, he could think of a few plausible paramecia ones, but he won't know for sure unless… Luffy? Hearing his name, the raven-haired boy stopped poking his midriff long enough to peer up at him. Yes. I want you to try to get to the other end of the inn within a second. Luffy scrunched up his nose. What for? You want to be a great pirate, right? Shanks asked, and when Luffy nodded eagerly in response, he continued, then you'll need to do this. All great pirates are capable of such a feat. But that's impossible. Not if he had a Logia-class power, but Shanks kept that to himself for now. He'll find out eventually anyway. It's possible, Luffy. Just concentrate on the wall at the other end of the room and envision yourself bursting to it. But how would that help me reach there in a second, Shanks? Luffy asked, confused. It'll be my legs that carry me there, right? Not if you possess a certain devil fruit power. The boy's eyes widened fractionally at the prospect of discovering his ability, and he immediately shifted his body to face the opposite end of the drinking hall, his eyes narrowing. Now, I want you to clear your mind. Just think of reaching the well as quickly as possible, and… In a blinding flash, Luffy dematerialized. At that very exact moment, there was a deafening explosion, and Shanks stared disbelievingly at the curiously shaped hole on the opposite wall, suspiciously resembling a certain black-haired boy that he could have sworn was just sitting opposite him. Whoa. A single word laced with worship from Kobe. That was so cool. Shanks barely paid any attention to the gathering crowd of cheering pirates around the fallen boy, who had quickly gotten back to his feet with a sheepish smile, while scratching the back of his head. He also wasn't aware when Makino sighed deeply beside him before scribbling something down on a list that was only half the length when he had last visited. All he could think of was that Luffy had actually eaten a Logia-class fruit, and an absurdly strong one at that. Dear mother of the sea devil. Dawn found Luffy gazing out at the wide expanse of sea from his precarious perch on the top of the cliff overlooking the port. The frayed ends of the straw hat he had grown accustomed to wearing fluttering slightly in the cool breeze. The sun was making its way leisurely up towards its rightful position in the sky, and the light and fluffy clouds foretold a good day of sailing ahead. The port was already bustling with activity and getting more crowded by the minute. Greetings and friendly banter were exchanged between the fellow sailors as they prepared to start another day of work. Usually, such a scene would have piqued Luffy's attention, but not that day. His eyes were trained on something else, a small boat bobbling up and down in the safe waters of the harbor. The day he had looked forward to so fervently all these years had finally arrived. A smile slowly spread across his face as the teenager took a seat on the sandy ground, crossing his legs. Excitement bubbled up from within him, and he was literally twitching to get going on what he's sure was going to be a journey of epic proportions. He was going to make new friends, fight strong people, travel across the world and of course, succeed Gol D. Roger as the next pirate king. There wasn't a single doubt in his mind that he would be unable to achieve that. He refused to even entertain that ridiculous notion. After all, self-doubt only serves as a deterrence. Having had learnt that from a young age under his gramps Monkey D. Garp, one of the few Marines still alive that had witnessed the former pirate king's rise to fame and notoriety tutelage, Luffy had become exceedingly optimistic towards everything and anything happening around him. Simple-minded, some people would chide him of being, but he knew better. Being happy-go-lucky had its merits, hence the phrase ignorance is breeze. Something along that line, anyway. Hurried footsteps sounded from behind him, the gradual increase in volume alerting him of someone's arrival. Luffy, however, didn't have to turn around to know who it was. He was only expecting a particular someone's company anyway. Kobe, it's good to see that you've changed your mind. The pink-haired teenager huffed loudly in annoyance as he stopped next to Luffy. You could have acted surprised at the very least. I could, Luffy conceded in a drawl, tilting his head to regard him with a grin, but I'm not. So I didn't. Kobe had grown tremendously as well over the years, both physically and mentally, albeit under Shanks' guidance instead, as he had followed the red-haired captain for a few more trips around the Grand Line. He had only decided to leave his service when Shanks achieved the title of Yonkou, ascending to become one of the 4 emperors of the sea that were feared and revered in equal measures across the world. Never one for fancy titles, Shanks had decided to stay within the New World so he could continue doing what he loved without interruption. That only solidified Kobe's determination to forge his own path. He briefly deliberated whether to join the Marines after announcing his imminent departure to Shanks, and his former captain had advised him to think it through more thoroughly after docking at Dawn Island for what could very well be Shanks' last visit in a very long time. Fingering his neckerchief absently, Kobe glanced at his friend next to him. After reuniting with Luffy and spending just a bit of time with the Energy Man, he had found himself craving for far more than just bringing justice to the world. Luffy's contagious enthusiasm and blinding passion towards his goals had eventually won his heart over. To be fair, he hadn't put up much of a fight either. In the face of his childlike naivety and ability to put people at ease with just a crooked smile, Kobe had fallen for Luffy's words hook, line and sinker. The duo lapsed into a comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. In a way, Kobe couldn't think of a better captain to follow than Luffy. Selfless to an almost laughable extent, his compassionate ways reminded Kobe of himself. Putting aside his tendencies to spout nonsensical comments and placing himself in danger for no good reason due to his non-existent sense of self-preservation, Luffy is an incredible role model. One that Kobe was certain he'll follow to the ends of the earth, which he actually might in his search for true justice. His adventures with Shanks had opened his eyes to many new things, and the proverbial light bulb had appeared above his head after all the shocking discoveries. The Marines were, in more ways than one, blinded by their pursuit of absolute justice, which has led them to commit offenses after offenses without so much as a blink. They claimed that their actions were all warranted in the attempt to achieve the greater good, but Kobe found that their actions just left a sour taste in his mouth. Pirates, on the other hand, or at least Shanks' crew, lived by an unspoken code of conduct. Sure, there will definitely be some motley crews that pay no heed to such rules in favor of foul play and underhanded tactics, but a majority actually prided themselves for following the rules. For example, when the captain of a crew surrenders, all personnel on the ship will immediately be considered as under the protection of the crew that had taken over them. Under no circumstances whatsoever should they be harmed after they wave the figurative white flag, unless they attempt to revolt. Only then can force be used, again, to subdue them. The conquered crew of pirates will then be allowed to get off at the next nearest island. Only the strongest survived in this world, and Kobe wouldn't have it any other way. It motivated him to constantly push himself to get stronger, to take down formidable adversaries he once thought impossible. And he was confident that Luffy will push him to become that stronger person he sought to become, in all sense of the word. "So, the Pirate King, huh?" Kobe said, breaking the quiet. "When you set a goal, you really aim high, don't you? What's the point of a goal if you can achieve it easily?" Luffy's response only affirmed that Kobe's decision to make him his captain was a right one. A goal should challenge you. Make you push yourself to your limits, and then further. "You've really changed, Luffy. I could say the same about you, Kobe." Kobe laughed, lifting his face up to the sky and basking in the glorious warmth of the morning sun. "I hope you've at least figured out how to control your devil fruit ability when I was gone." There was a long pause, and when the pink-haired boy looked to his captain, he saw that Luffy's expression was carefully blank, inscrutable, even. He knew better than to push for an answer though. Luffy was bound to reply eventually. As expected, the answer came within a minute. However, when he spoke, his tone was measured, the words coming out slowly, as if he was running them through his brain before saying them out loud. He really did change, Kobe thought wryly. "My power is unique. Even after all these years and help from Shanks as well as my Gramps, I still can't fully grasp what I'm capable of. The possibilities are endless. Energy isn't technically an element on its own, so even the devil fruit appraiser is way out of his depth here." Luffy pursed his lips, picking up a stray pebble on the ground and tossing it up into the air. "You see, energy is all around us. It can be changed into different forms like light or heat. I've found that I'm able to manipulate the energy surrounding me to move faster or slower. Take this," he pointed to the pebble in his palm, for example. "When it's tossed in the air, it possesses a certain type of energy, and when it reaches its peak, all the energy has been lost, converted into another form, so it pummels to the ground." In demonstration, he let the pebble hit the ground, sending up a small plume of dust from the impact. "I can alter the concentration of energy by absorbing it into my body at will, watch." Fascinated, Kobe kept his eyes trained on the pebble as Luffy once again threw it into the air. It slowed down in midair, having lost all its energy, and was about to drop back down when it halted entirely, levitating in the air. "Whoa." Kobe gaped in astonishment at the sight of the floating object. Raising a trembling finger, he prodded gently at it, causing it to move just the slightest bit before freezing once again. This is so cool. I took away all the energy or forces, to be exact, acting on the pebble. Without anything directing it, it remained suspended in midair until I returned the energy back to it. A split second later, the pebble commenced its journey back to the sandy ground. That's just one example of what I'm able to do, Luffy continued. Like I said, the possibilities are endless. Anything regarding the manipulation of energy, basically. I just have to be more creative. That's awesome, Kobe gushed, happy for the progress his companion had made. I wish I could do something like that too. Luffy laughed loudly. I'm sure we'll find a devil fruit for you along the way, Kobe. Don't worry about it. Maybe yours will be even cooler than mine. Perhaps. A smile tugged at his lips, because how could you not laugh along with Luffy? Kobe had actually given this a lot of thought, and by this, he was talking about consuming a devil fruit. The opportunity had arose twice in total during his trip with Shanks, his crew having had stumbled upon them when exploring islands yet to be mapped. He was offered the fruit, seeing how the rest of the crew either already had a devil fruit power, or had pledged to never consume one. He would be lying if he said that he hadn't been tempted. But he had rationalized, like many members on Shanks' fearsome crew that swore off devil fruits, they wished to achieve whatever they had set out to do with their own strength only, and without any additional help from external parties. When he had approached one of the above-mentioned member for advice on this matter, the pirate had merely chuckled and slapped him on the back, hard. I have absolute confidence in my abilities, he had said while in the midst of lighting a cigarette, and if the situation arises where my own strength is not enough to allow me to prevail, I'll accept my death with a smile, because I have done my best and have no regrets left. That was a piece of wisdom he still held until now, resounding deeply within him. He wanted to improve, but not with the help of a devil fruit. He wanted to become stronger by himself. He had come a long way since the day Shanks first found and rescued him from Alvida's clutches, but the road in front of him was even longer and filled with danger. He wouldn't pretend that he wasn't afraid, just thinking about it sometimes had him wondering if he was biting off more than he could chew, but he wasn't alone. Not any longer. He had Luffy. So, what are we waiting for? His heart was pounding fiercely in his, and Kobe had never felt more alive than at that exact moment. You ready to go, Captain? A blinding grin and a reply that was all Luffy. I'm always ready. Oh pop. It didn't take long for the novelty of it all to wear off, escalated by Luffy's maddening nonchalance and downright stupidity. The initial excitement faded slowly to nothing more than a buzz before long, and an hour after that, focusing on not strangling Luffy was all Kobe could do. He was rapidly losing his sanity, and throwing himself off the side of the boat was getting more and more tempting. We need a bigger boat, Luffy was saying with a flourish of his right hand from his seat at the foremost tip of the small craft. I won't be able to get any more Nakama if our boat remains this small. They won't even be able to fit. Kobe didn't bother looking up. He was busy scrutinizing the compass in his hand, trying and failing to make sense of where they were going. Perhaps, if his captain had remembered to bring a map. Well, we're at it, how about we get ourselves a navigator as well? Someone who will actually guide us to our next destination rather than eventually lead us to our untimely deaths. It was apparent that Luffy was taking his suggestion some serious thought as he frowned, a look of intense concentration taking over his usual carefree expression. If he didn't know better, Kobe would have thought he was making a crucial life-or-death decision, which, in actual fact, could quite literally be the case. Maybe Luffy might actually make the correct call this time. Nah. Not that important. Let's focus on getting a bigger boat first. His cheerful yet absolutely tactless response had Kobe sighing in resignation. Well, it wasn't for lack of trying. Returning his attention to the infernal piece of contraption that is the compass, Kobe uttered a silent prayer to the Sea Devil that they'll recruit a navigator sooner rather than later. Preferably before they both cease to exist. Oh pop. It was mid-afternoon by the time the duo realized that they were adrift in the middle of nowhere. To be more exact, it took a good half a day for Luffy to realize that they were floating about aimlessly with no means at hand to get to their next destination, wherever that might be. And if it were not for his growling stomach demanding an immediate meaty sacrifice, he probably would still be oblivious to that worrying fact, despite Kobe's constant efforts at alerting him to it. We should have brought oars to row with, Kobe grumbled, already envisioning his tombstone and the words that will be engraved on it when they both kick the figurative bucket. Luffy first, of course, since he was going to fray his skin with his bare hands, devil fruit powers be damned. Here lies idiot. Luffy's tombstone. Here lies the bigger idiot who made idiot his captain. God bless your soul. This is the last time I let you pack our supplies. Really? The bag is empty, for crying out loud. Luffy didn't look the slightest bit fazed by his accusation. You told me to bring only the bare essentials. Yes, I did, but you brought nothing. No, Luffy replied excruciatingly slowly with a furrowed brow, as if it evaded his understanding why he couldn't grasp such a simple logic. I brought oxygen. You know, what we need to survive. If that's not essential, I don't know what is. His huge grin made Kobe's right eye twitch erratically, his whole body tensing in anticipation for the sensation jumping into the ocean. He had no idea how much more he could take before he started a mutiny. Bet you didn't think of that, huh? You may now thank me for my thoughtfulness. Trust me, thanking you is the last thing on my mind right now. Words squeezed out through gritted teeth. Ah, of course. You're probably thinking about getting a bigger boat, right? That's my first mate, always having his priorities right even when his captain is getting carried away. Totally misinterpreting Kobe's expression of utter disbelief as agreement, Luffy clapped his hands together in glee and continued happily, then, I say we get ourselves a cook. And not just a normal cook. No, he or she must be an accomplished one that's able to whip up the most delicious dishes like Makino. Hey, maybe I should have just asked her to come along. Luffy removed his straw hat and scratched the back of his head. Do you think we could turn and head back, Kobe? It won't take long, promise. Exasperation had Kobe's voice going up several octaves. We are stuck here in the middle of the ocean, Luffy. Even if I wanted to go back, and I speak only the truth when I say I really do, I'm trapped here with you. Oh. The raven-haired boy fell silent. Thankful for the respite, however brief, Kobe surveyed their surroundings. The ocean stretched as far as his eyes could see in every direction, but a bobbling speck of brown stood out amongst the sea of blue. From this far away, it looked like a piece of shipwreck. Raising an eyebrow, he reached for the telescope on deck, one of the only 3 objects that Luffy had brought along for the journey. A compass, telescope and a bloody orange he had immediately devoured 10 seconds after leaving the shore. You can never have enough vitamin C. Luffy had advised him with a huge grin when he noticed Kobe's look of bafflement. Shaking his head with another sigh, he lifted the telescope to his eye and peered through it at the area where he had spotted the piece of wood. It took a few seconds for him to identify the object again. It was actually another small boat being tossed and turned quite wildly in the medium-sized waves. Kobe lowered the telescope and frowned. The weather was clearer than his immediate future, not a particularly informative analogy, he admitted, considering his bleak outlook on life with Luffy in the picture, but still, and there wasn't a single cloud in sight. The sea was eerily calm, which was primarily the reason why they hadn't moved much in the past few hours. So why in the world were there big waves coming their way? Raising the telescope once again, he observed as the boat continued to be bullied by the forces of nature. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and he took a step forward, squinting harder as his breath caught in his throat. It took several moments for the gears in his mind to turn and process the information of what he'd just seen. Dear mother of the sea devil. Shock rendered him immobile and mute for a further few seconds before he finally found his voice. He slowly placed the telescope down. Luffy, he muttered, nudging his captain in the back with the toe of his boot, causing Luffy to jerk up in surprise. We have a problem. He jabbed a quivering finger in the direction of the emerging Sea King, just as it released an ear-splitting roar. A very big problem. At burglar Nami wondered if this was indeed retribution for all the crimes she had committed over the years, however petty they were. She had robbed, tricked and conned countless people from different islands, mainly men, since they were especially susceptible to her womanly charms and more likely to fall prey to her schemes. With a simple wink, a sway of her hips or a chase to the cheek, she would have them at her mercy, willing to offer her anything at just a snap of her fingers. She had exploited her talent ruthlessly, milking her victims for everything that they were worth. However, she made it a point to only steal from pirates. She understood that it wasn't any better as she was still committing a crime, but at least she was stealing from people who were equally undeserving of such riches, having had obtained most of it through illegal means. It was nothing personal, really, she just needed the money to free her hometown from the clutches of Arlong, the cold-blooded literally and figuratively merman that ruled with an ironclad fist and crushed all manners of resistance swiftly and without a single shred of mercy. It had taken close to 8 years, but she almost had enough. One more successful heist and she would have been done, able to buy the freedom of her and her fellow townsfolk. They would have finally been able to live without constant fear for their lives. And of course, this had to happen when she was so close to the finish line. Gripping onto the sides of the stolen boat for her dear life, Nami let loose a scream when the monster Sea King broke the surface of the water with a deafening roar that left her disoriented, partially deaf and scared out of her wits. The waves its emergence caused tossed her around violently, threatening to completely capsize the boat. Large droplets of seawater rained down on her from the outward explosion, drenching her almost completely. I'm going to die, Nami thought dazedly, staring at the rampaging Sea King mere meters away as its scaly, snake-like head swiveled slowly to land on her. I'm actually going to die before I regain my freedom. All that saving up for absolutely nothing. She felt numb, resigned to her miserable fate of being a Sea King snack. Still, that didn't stop her from making one last measly attempt at saving her own life. "Mr. Sea King." She called out to the monster, waving her hands in the air as if it will make her appeal more convincing. "I'm thin and full of bones. I guarantee you won't like my taste. How about you let me go this one time? Please." She added on a seductive wink as well as a shimmy of her hip for good measure, though it probably just looked like a body spasm with how much she was trembling. A second passed as the Sea King regarded her blankly, blinking several times as if in confusion. Nami held her breath, her hand over her pounding heart. Then the giant predator narrowed its eyes, opened its mouth, revealing an impressive row of razor-sharp teeth, each the size of a house, and sprung towards her with another loud roar. "At least I tried." There was an ear-piercing shriek resounding in the air, and idly she recognized it as her own as she brought both hands up to cover her eyes, unwilling to watch as the jaws closed around her with a snap and the daylight to be extinguished as she traveled down the monster's gullet. But nothing she anticipated came. Instead, there was a sound of solid contact, followed by a deep guttural wailing and another splash of cold, frigid water that left her sputtering. Her eyes shot open, and she realized that it was quite too quiet. Where had the Sea King gone? The quick glance around her surroundings ascertained her initial suspicion that the Sea King had disappeared, and with the immediate danger out of the picture for now, she took deep, steady breaths to calm herself down. Her pulse was still beating way too fast for her liking, with adrenaline skirting through her veins from the near-death experience. "Okay, Nami, you've been given a second chance to live, so you're going to make an effort to be a better person. .. Nami gradually became aware of her hair standing on ends, as if there were lots of static charges in the air. Frowning, she turned her upper body to check the back of the boat, only to find the deep blue sea as far as she could see, as well as clear skies. It doesn't look like it's going to rain either. Her brow knitted together as she attempted to discern the source of the discomfort. Nami turned back and found herself staring at a teenage boy with a red straw hat on his head. For what seemed like the third time that day, a strangled gasp escaped her mouth involuntarily, and her hand instinctively went to her, over her heart, to ensure that the organ was still working normally. "Who are you? You weren't here a moment ago." The teenager removed his straw hat with one hand and grinned widely. "My name's Luffy. It's very nice to meet you." He sounded calm and cheerful, which really ruffled Nami's feathers. He couldn't just come and scare the living shit out of her and act as if nothing happened. "You have a very small boat." Stretching his arms and arching his back in a full stretch, Luffy pointed out with disappointment in his tone. "It's almost smaller than ours." Nami ignored his rambling. She didn't really care how big her boat was. It wasn't even hers anyway. "How did you get here?" "Like how any normal person gets to the middle of the sea." "By sailing." "I don't see any boats around here." "That's because my boat is." Luffy craned his neck and pointed somewhere in the far horizon over. ... I can't see it anymore. The waves must have pushed it even further away." A slight frown. "I hope Kobe's okay." "Kobe? Who's never mind." Nami shook her head, sending wet tendrils of her hair swinging around and slapping the side of her cheeks when it returned. "How did you get here if your boat's all the way over there? And what happened to that Sea King? Did you have anything to do with how it just disappeared?" The teenager was still looking away from her at where he had tagged his boat to be and didn't reply. "Hey Luffy, I'm talking to you." The redhead huffed in annoyance, not used to being ignored by men. They fawned over her, craved her attention. ... Did almost anything as long as she so much as acknowledges their presence. And this fella right here was more interested in a friggin' boat that he couldn't even see anymore. The mere idea of it was inconceivable to the gorgeous girl who was used to being revered by men. Luffy spared her a cursory glance. "You were asking me something?" "Yes," she said with an air of exasperation. "I wanted to know how you got onto this boat. And what happened to the Sea King." "Oh." Nami waited patiently as the boy made himself comfortable on the small boat. She took this time to really give him a good once-over. She had been too shell-shocked to really register his appearance just now. He was tall and somewhat lanky, a sure sign of him growing into his post-pubescent body. A mop of disheveled black hair could be seen under the straw hat, and the unruly strands blew about gently in the breeze. Clad in a black t-shirt with a lightning bolt graphic in the middle and a pair of blue shorts, the lounging boy smiled at her expectantly. "Well, aren't you going to answer me?" His face clouded with confusion. "Answer you about what? Were you even listening to what I was saying?" Her smile was getting more strained by the minute. She didn't want to offend him as he could very possibly be her savior, but it was increasingly unlikely with each word that left his mouth. He looked to be in his early teenage years, but with the mentality of a toddler. There was no way the Sea King was taken out by him, right? Not really. He held up one hand when Nami prepared to barrage him with a string of vulgarities, and surprise rendered her speechless, but only for a second. It was quickly replaced with white-hot anger. Did he just tell her to shut up, I'll be right back? And in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The boat rocked unsteadily from the sudden lack of weight on one side, and Nami scampered to the middle to balance it out with a yelp. She was soaked to the bone, confused and above it all, furious beyond belief. Fuming silently, the Redeed folded her arms over her translucent top and imagined skinning the raven-haired boy alive when he returned. If he returned. What made her think that he was definitely coming back? Well, in her very short but incredibly frustrating encounter with him, her initial impression of him was that he could be trusted. As ludicrous as it may sound, she was hardly ever wrong about such things. She's a good judge of character, always had been, which was exceptionally helpful in her line of business, and could read people like an open book. After all, deception was her forte. She could sense it from a mile away, like a dark and cloying aura. It helped her to differentiate between ally and foe, though she rarely got close enough to make friends. It made stealing from others easier, they were all just nameless faces, one of her many victims. Having a conscience made things exponentially harder, and now that she was so close to her goal, she couldn't afford any distractions. Just thinking about her current situation got Nami expelling a ragged breath that she didn't know she was holding. Why did her life have to be so complicated? You look sad. A familiar voice startled her from her reverie, and she straightened, pushing strands of hair away from her face. Is something the matter? Luffy was back again, sitting directly opposite her and so close that their legs were touching. Uncomfortable being in such close proximity to someone she didn't know well yet, Nami slid backwards on her rump till her back hit the other end of the boat. It's nothing, she mumbled, cheeks heating up for some reason under his curious scrutiny. Nothing you can do to help me, anyway. Where did you go? Tech on Kobe and our boat. Who's this Kobe person? Nami asked. His smile lit up his face. My crew member. He's a great person, he wanted to be a marine last time, but now he's decided to be a pirate like me. Nami gaped at him. You're a pirate. Then his whole sentence sank in. You're the captain of your crew? Yep. Luffy confirmed with another ear-to-ear grin, totally oblivious to her horrified tone. He did that a lot, Nami thought wryly, smile like there was not a single care in the world. She wondered how that would feel. I'm going to be the next pirate king. Of everything she had expected to hear, that was quite possibly the last. Below, I'm going to save you from Arlong, and just above, you're actually a princess, Nami, here's all the treasures you've ever desired in your life. You're kidding me, right? Even he wasn't that big of an idiot, no. Luffy cocked his head to the side. Why would I lie to you? You're serious. He's serious. He was indeed that big of an idiot. Of course. With Kobe by my side, nothing can stop us. He looked a little sheepish then. We might need a bigger boat though. Do you, by any chance? He abruptly stopped mid-sentence, a perplexed expression replacing that smile. Name found herself detachedly thinking that he didn't look nearly as good as when he was happy. What's wrong? She ventured to ask, mildly wary of the answer she will receive. Luffy unfolded himself from his sitting position and stood up. Stay back, he trailed off and turned to her. I still don't know your name. It was at that very moment that a column of water shot into the air next to the boat with a ferocity that had Nami backpedaling instinctively with a short cry. The giant waves the explosion created swept the boat away, and there was a brief moment where Nami thought for sure that the boat was about to capsize, but it was like the laws of physics suddenly stopped being applicable to them as they hung motionless almost perpendicular to the sea. The motion that would have pushed them over completely disappeared, leaving her with a disorienting sense of total inertia. Then it was over, and the boat settled itself once more onto the choppy waves, bobbling merrily as if nothing had happened, and it was all just a figment of her imagination. She could almost believe it too, it was simply too surreal and unnatural. However, the trashing Sea King from before directly in her line of sight discredited that theory entirely. It looked pissed. Swallowing audibly, Nami lifted her head to find Luffy standing exactly where he had been before, taking in the scene before him dispassionately like it didn't bother him in the slightest. Perhaps it didn't, after all, from what she could gather about his abilities, he could dematerialize and teleport at will, he wasn't in danger at all. She was. Hailing at that revelation, Nami hugged herself tightly. Maybe she had spoken too early. Maybe the Sea Devil didn't favor her that much after all. Who would? She was a conniving and deceitful bitch, she would be better off dead. But was it really that bad to meet her demise now? She could escape from her troubles, leave all her problems behind. She no longer had to worry about her future or engage with the demons from her past. It would be truly liberating. What's your name? Nami was so caught up in her thoughts that she almost missed the quiet question. Huh? She looked nervously at the Sea King, who was eyeing them like a human would a juicy piece of steak. Even if she wasn't hugely opposed to dying, she was still unnerved. After all, this was her first time. Not like there'll be a second, but hey. She was allowed to feel skittish. Your name? The shadow cast by his straw hat concealed Luffy's expression. I'd like to know your name. I don't think this is the time, Luffy. You should get out of here while you still can. I'm not going anywhere. Then you're going to die. Nami shouted, getting up to shake some sense into him roughly. There's no way out for me, unless you can teleport me out of here too. She paused, cruel hope blossoming in her. Can you? His reply was short and like a knife through her heart. Not without killing you. Her shoulders slumped. It really was the end of the road for her. Now, can you tell me your name? Why does it matter anyway? She burst out, scowling at the raven-haired boy. I won't be around much longer for you to call me by it. She took a few deep breaths to collect herself, then sighed. Might as well humor him before her demise, huh? Oh, fine. It's Nami. There, you happy now? The predatory roar permeated the air, and out of the corner of her eye, Nami spotted the Sea King, opening its massive maw and lunging towards them. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for her death to be swift and merciful. Nami, huh? She dimly heard Luffy repeat her name. I like it. And little did she know that from then onwards, her whole world was about to turn upside down. Luffy didn't like how Nami's bottom lip was quivering, how she was cowering in fear. He felt inexplicably protective of her, especially when she was in such a sorrowful state. Maybe it was because of an incident in the past that left an everlasting impression on him. He was 10 then, and he and Ace were messing around with some of the neighboring kids. Having had Ace as his sole playmate and companion for a large chunk of his childhood, along with his Gramps as his mentor, it came as little surprise that he had been unable to comprehend the physical limitations of normal kids who hadn't undergone the same training as him. During a game of tag, he had used unnecessary force on one of the girls in the midst of his usual exuberance, injuring her in the process. Thankfully, it had only been a small scrape, but she still cried her lungs out. It was the first time he had ever saw and heard a girl cry, but it destroyed him. He swore it'll be the last time. He didn't particularly enjoy the damage control once the tears started flowing freely, and his complete lack of experience interacting with the opposite left him totally clueless on how to make them feel better. After all, he never really had a way with words. He was used to letting his actions speak for themselves, which was how he spent most of his time with Ace. Their conversations comprised of little to no words, unless you counted grunts and childish insults. They were more comfortable in expressing their emotions through the little things they did as they took after their grandpa, who was a man of few words. It got better over time, as Luffy found himself opening up more and more to the people around him, who had no inhibitions to showing their emotions freely, wearing their hearts on their sleeves proudly. Narrowing his eyes at the approaching Sea King he had sent sinking to the bottom of the ocean floor just minutes ago, Luffy reached within him and drew on his enormous reserves of energy. This creature had distressed Nami. Its fate was already decided. His power was a wild and unrestrained beast that responded eagerly, wanting to be unleashed to wreak havoc, and it took him a sizable effort to keep it at bay, to prevent it from obliterating everything around him in pure undiluted energy. The vehemence of his emotions caused the beast within him to fluctuate in strength alarmingly, but he tamped it down viciously with the control he had mastered painstakingly over the years. It trashed and snarled, demanding to be released in a physical form. Only allowing the tiniest bit to leak out and manifest into blue sparks at the tips of his fingers, Luffy lifted one of his hands and pointed his index finger at the rampaging Sea King. It was so close now he could smell the rotten stench of decaying food down its gaping throat. He fired off a blast of energy between its eyes. A small beam of coalesced energy pierced straight through the Sea King. The extreme heat cauterized the entry and exit wound immediately, and the putrid smell of burning flesh hung heavily in the air. Luffy summoned a gust of wind to ward it off before it reached Nami, not wanting her to be privy of the violence taking place inches away. At the same time, Luffy gathered all the energy the Sea King possessed within his palm by closing it before redirecting it the opposite way with a deft flick of his fingers. In the span of a second, the Sea King was defeated and sent sailing back through the air soundlessly. Luffy took a well-deserved moment to survey his handiwork before it disappeared from sight, a mere speck in the distance. You can open your eyes now, Nami, Luffy said as he gently tapped the shuddering girl's head. It's all over. It's gone. Bewildered large brown eyes blinked rapidly up at him, and she took a quick look around to determine if he was speaking the truth. But how? What happened? She asked shakily and scanned around her one more time, as if her eyes had deceived her the first round. I sent it away. Luffy answered, purposefully vague. It was partially true, anyway. The last vestiges of his anger faded away when Nami straightened her back and pegged him with a withering stare that had him smiling. Annoyance. He'll take that over sadness any day. How do you just send a Sea King away, Luffy? That's not possible. I can be very persuasive when I want to be. Nami snorted in an unladylike manner. Yeah right. And reindeer can talk. Something about that sentence bugged the hell out of Luffy, but he didn't pay much heed to it. All in good time, maybe. They can't. I didn't know that. The pretty Riti just looked at him. They can't, Luffy, she deadpanned. But you just said that they could. It's just a saying, not you know what, forget it. Nami tried to stand up and teetered on unsteady legs. She waved him off when Luffy moved to support her, keeping him at arm's length with the outstretched hand. I can manage on my own. She was aware of Luffy's eyes boring into her back when she hunkered down onto her haunches and opened a small wooden compartment in the middle of the boat. Reaching inside with her hand, she fished around to check that all her belongings were still in place, particularly the sack of gold she had pilfered from the last group of pirates. It brought her total tally up to 100 million Beely, the agreed sum with Arlong for the freedom of her island. Once she ensured that everything was in order, she closed the hatch again and faced Luffy. So. She felt uncharacteristically awkward. Thanks for saving me. I, really appreciate it. Wow, way to go, Nami. A seemingly perpetual smile on his face widened into a grin. It was no trouble. Apparently not facing the same problem as her, Luffy adjusted his askew straw hat so it sat on his head more comfortably. What you gonna do now? Shielding her eyes from the setting sun, she gazed in the direction of Kokoyashi village. The familiar sensation of despair and longing welled up from deep inside. She had some business to settle. I'm going home. Where's that? Nami slanted him a glance, pursing her lips together before she automatically lied to him. Lying was second nature to her. She had been doing it her whole life. However, he had saved her life, and her senses told her that he was trustworthy. She owed him that much. Studiously ignoring the voice inside her head telling her that she was undeserving of being even remotely close to someone like him, she said finally, Kokoyashi village. It's just northwest of here, but quite a distance away. Cool. Do you know how to use a compass? Luffy sounded excited. Yes, she answered slowly, trying to figure out his angle for that question, but coming up with zilch. Don't everyone? Unsurprisingly, Luffy shook his head. Not me. Kobe doesn't know how to use it too, but he's trying really hard back there. Something occurred to her. Then how are you going to become the pirate king if nobody on board your crew is able to navigate? Luffy laughed heartily. Things will work out. They always do. Nami found herself desperately wanting to believe in the boy's words. Not always, she whispered to herself, but Luffy must have heard it because he caught her by the side of her shoulders and effortlessly lifted her up entirely before setting her down in front of him, much to her indignant sputtering and struggling. She clamped her mouth shut when she noticed how serious and still he had become. His gaze settled on her face and Nami fidgeted slightly, unable to maintain eye contact. When she made to lower her head to escape his probing eyes, his fingers, warm and calloused, cupped her chin and gently urged her to raise her head so that she was looking at him again. Her breath caught in her throat at the intensity in which he was regarding her and her heart started racing faster. What's going on? She had never felt this way before. Join my crew, Nami. His voice was low and silky, a husky whisper that had heat prickling the skin around her neck. I promise that I'll never let any harm come to you. Then he was gone, and disappointment thrummed throughout her body at his departure. She shelved it away in her mental catalog to review at a later date. She wasn't in the right frame of mind right then to do any analyzing of her feelings. I can't, Luffy. She wrung her hands, recognizing it as her nervous tic. I don't want to get you hurt. You can't help me. The voice in her head chimed in return, and this time it was a force to be reckoned with. He defeated the Sea King like it was nothing, it reasoned, he could take on Arlong and win. He'll be able to save you. Nami quashed any emergence of hope before it could take root fully. She wasn't about to risk Luffy's life and find out if he was a match for Arlong. The merman was one of the pirates with the highest bounty in the East Blue for a reason. He's tyrannically strong. I can. Two words spoken with so much conviction that even Nami wanted to believe it, but she shook her head quickly, partially to dislodge any creeping thoughts to agree and potentially kill her savior, and partially to disagree. You can't. Tell me your problem. She shook her head again. You already saved my life once. I won't want to impose any more on you. Luffy looked as if he wanted to continue arguing, but then he drummed his fingers against his jawline before nodding in agreement. Fine. Nami told herself that she wasn't disappointed from the lack of fight he had put up. Good. On one condition. Luffy brazenly grabbed her hand and Nami almost jumped in shock. You join my crew for the time being. We need someone to show us the way, and if I'm not wrong, your town is on the way to the reverse mountain. He waited patiently for her to affirm his words, and Nami nodded mutely, her thoughts seemingly scattered yet focused at the point of contact between them at the same time. We can go our separate ways at Coconut Village. Kokoyashi Village, Nami corrected him before finding the strength to tug her hand away. It was doing weird things to her brain and she didn't like it. That's what I said. Luffy took a step back, all smiles. So is that a yes? She blew out a breath. She didn't need to weigh the pros and cons to know that this was beneficial for both of them. This arrangement meant protection for her from other sneaky pirates looking to make a quick killing, and in turn, she could teach them a thing or two about navigation. It was a win-win situation. Absolutely perfect. And frankly, she just didn't have the strength to dispute with him anymore. Nami flashed him a tired smile back. It's a yes. She tried not to read too much into how her heart fluttered when Luffy beamed. She just had a shitty day, that's all. Kobe had taken the arrival of a new crewmate well. Maybe that was an understatement, he had literally sobbed in relief when Luffy parted to him that particular piece of information of Nami joining them, purposefully leaving out the temporary portion, as he had every intention on convincing her to stay for good during their time together as a crew. He had muttered something like, "My prayers have been answered," before crawling over to Nami like he was helplessly lost in a desert and she was the elusive oasis. He watched quizzically as the pink-haired boy in question kneeled in front of Nami and poked her in the thigh tentatively at first before crying out and thanking her arrival profusely while laying the back of her hand, much to her chagrin and stupefaction. She shot him a questioning look and Luffy shrugged in return. Once the necessary introductions and niceties were out of the way, Nami was making the final preparations by stowing away her belongings into the compartment on what would be her new boat and taking stock of the items they had at hand, which was pretty much nothing. Luffy looked on with interest as her face turned a dark shade of beetroot red. "Can someone explain to me," she said slowly, menacingly, her head swinging to the side to regard the two of them with a scowl that would have cowed lesser men, "why we have no supplies at all?" Kobe suddenly found the tips of his boots to be highly fascinating. Luffy, having no sense of self-preservation at all, answered brightly, "I can." Nami raised an eyebrow. "Please do." "I ate it." "You ate all the supplies?" "Not like there was much anyway." Kobe chimed in out of the blue, eager to lay the blame on his captain, now that he finally had someone on board that could count past 3. "And whose fault is that?" Luffy's smile faltered slightly when he realized that the both of them were glaring in his direction. He scratched the back of his neck. "What? Who's responsible for the lack of supplies, Luffy?" Nami prompted again. He looked genuinely puzzled. "Why are the two of you looking at me like I know the answer to that?" "Because you're the one who packed our supplies, Luffy," Kobe clarified with a patience he didn't feel, appealing to his logic that he knew was lying dormant somewhere in that head of his. "Therefore, you're the one at fault for not packing enough." But Luffy's eyes had already glazed over in the middle of his explanation. He stifled a yawn, then pulled his straw hat down low over his face. "Okay. I forgive you." Then he was asleep to the world and snoring loud enough to wake the dead. Kobe took a deep breath and blew it out in small increments to control his rising temper. By the end of this journey, if they even managed to finish it by some miracle, he expected to be awarded a medal of sainthood for tolerating Luffy. The glance at Nami told the same story, though she seemed to be much better at taking it in stride. Besides for the single furrowed brow, she appeared to be pretty well compassed. "How long have you been traveling with him again?" she asked when they made eye contact. "It's only been a few hours actually." Kobe rotated his stiff shoulders forward and backwards. "Feels like an eternity though." Iridiide shook her head with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." There was definitely a maniacal edge to his smile when his lips curled. He wasn't feeling overtly sane. "Save it for yourself. You'll need it." It didn't take long for there to be sight of land between Nami setting up a makeshift sail to catch the wind and her expert sense of direction, guiding them towards the nearest island from her memory. It was home to a small marine base, and she was all too aware of the dangers looming ahead for the wanted pirates. She refused to acknowledge them as real pirates or an actual crew. She couldn't even take their captain seriously, for devil's sake, which in turn meant trouble for her as well since she was tagging along. Nami would have preferred to skip that town entirely, but their extreme lack of basic provisions and daily necessities she gave her temporary captain a pointed look was forcing her hand. She forced herself to run her dilemma by Luffy, as there were unspoken rules on board a ship that she knew had to be followed for there to be order. He, of course, proved to be of no help at all. Instead, the conversation just served to compound her indecision, bringing her back to square one and even more confused than before. Kobe actually thought it over with her like a normal human being would, and the two of them came to the decision that they had no choice but to dock right under the noses of their enemies and hope for the best. They were in dire straits, and the next island was 2 or 3 more days worth of sailing away, and that was with favorable wind. Besides, they have no bounty as of yet, so they were relatively safe as long as they stayed under the radar and remained inconspicuous while they replenished their stocks. Which meant keeping a close eye on a particular raven-haired troublemaker. The person in question was still snoozing away peacefully, having slunk into a more comfortable position sometime during his sleep. Lying horizontally with his straw hat engulfing his entire face, his prized possession would be lifted up into the air with each of his exhale and almost collapse inwards on the middle itself on every inhale. Nami felt the side of her lips tug up into a faint smile. Night had fallen, and the thick darkness provided good cover when the trio reached shore. The Redeed was surprised when there wasn't an army of uniform-clad Marines waiting to apprehend them for being public nuisances, considering the amount of noise required to wake their captain up. "Where are you?" Luffy asked in the middle of a huge yawn, so it came out of his mouth totally incoherent. He repeated the question a heartbeat later. "Where are we?" Kobe, who was securing their small craft to a tree along the beach, answered, "I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I didn't know there was a marine base so close to Fuchsia village." He looked to their navigator, who raised both hands up to deflect the question. "Don't look at me, I just map them. I don't name them." Luffy squinted at the town in the distance. "Well, what are we waiting for then? Let's go and have some fun." The moron then proceeded to waltz off, whistling like their every actions were being monitored by the Marines. "Luffy," Nami hissed when she caught up to her maddeningly cheerful captain, "didn't you hear what Kobe said? We are on an island with a marine base." "So?" His expression brightened. "Maybe I'll get to see Gramps here." "Your grandpa? Why would you see him here? He's a marine." "What?" Nami's voice went unnaturally high. "He's a vice admiral, actually," Kobe added helpfully from the side, carrying a small pack with whatever stuff they had left on his shoulders. "His name is Garp. You might have heard of him." Luffy continued trotting on as if Kobe hadn't just dropped the biggest bomb in the world. Nami, on the other hand, froze. She felt her world drop off its axis, felt it slowly spin out of control. The Garp. Monkey D. Garp. The one who single-handedly defeated Shiki the Golden Lion and cornered the original Pirate King numerous times during his reign. "I dunno." Luffy stacked his hands behind his head and resumed whistling. "How can you not know what your grandpa did?" "He's just Gramps to me," Luffy answered simply, "I don't care about anything else." Kobe sighed before addressing her unanswered query. "Yes, the one and only Garp. The imbecile over there is actually Monkey D. Luffy, proof of his lineage." He shook his head wearily. "Though I cannot begin to conceive how a man as great as him can end up having a descendant like him." Luffy didn't seem too bothered by what Kobe said. He was more engrossed trying to snag a coconut just out of his reach and was jumping up and down while flailing his arms about like a panicked turkey. Finally, after close to a minute, their panting and red-faced captain hollered out to them, bested by a high-lying fruit. "Hey, come and help me." Nami stared at him, then back at Kobe. Maybe he's adopted. Trekking to the town was an uneventful affair, but Nami figured that it's for the best. She had enough excitement to last her a lifetime already, and the respite was much welcomed. In a corner of her mind, however, there was a tingling sense of foreboding that warned her there was much, much more to come. It was close to midnight when they arrived. The town, small and quaint, was still easily double the size of her own village. Most of the locals had retired back to their homes for the night, and those that were still on the streets hurried to return to the safety of their houses. The layout of the streets and alleyways were hard to navigate in the day due to the high walls and houses obscuring any view of adjacent areas, and it was virtually impossible at night. It didn't help that the darkness seemed all-encompassing, trapping them in and slowly closing in on them. Nami was starting to feel abnormally claustrophobic. The search for an inn was proving to be quite futile as a result. Granted, they had only scoured a small portion of the town, but the Redeed thought it to be highly peculiar for a settlement of this size to not have inns popping up at every corner. If her memory served her well, she recalled this island to be a bustling port and a prosperous hub for trading due to its relatively centralized position in East Blue, as well as the ever-looming presence of the Marines. This town was supposed to be safe. Shielded from harm. Untouchable. "It's darker than usual," she commented casually, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her when her vision narrowed, blanketed by layers upon layers of swirling gloom. Kobe's voice was unsteady when he replied. "Yeah. This isn't normal." He turned to Luffy. "What do you think?" Only at the mention of their captain's name did Nami glance at the raven-haired boy, and she was hit by a wave of panic at his creased brow, the deep frown and tense set of his shoulders. Luffy was never perturbed for no small reason. "There's lots of power in the air," he said quietly. "I don't like it. Let's get off the streets as soon as possible." She and Kobe agreed wholeheartedly, and they sped up, resuming their search for a place to spend the night. Nami unknowingly found herself subconsciously withdrawing into herself, as if her survival instincts were kicking in and wanted to shrink away from her surroundings as much as possible. She stuck closer to Luffy, and Kobe was doing the exact same on the other side. His presence was as steadying and calming as an anchor in the tumultuous sea. She felt infinitely better after just a minute of being literally pasted to his side. During that time, Nami noticed several shady figures loitering in the flickering shadows the dark alleyways provided. Shivers crept down her spine when she felt their piercing stares on her, and she hugged herself, feeling inexplicably cold and uncomfortable all of a sudden. "Can we get out of here, Luffy?" she pleaded to her captain. "Let's head back. I don't want to spend another minute here." There. Kobe jabbed a finger at a low-rise red stucco building with the words "in" on the wooden block hanging rather haphazardly from two strings above the front of the door. The interior was dimly lit up and it looked modest enough, though at that moment even a rundown shack would do for Nami. She just wanted some sort of shelter to take refuge in before she becomes a permanent accessory at Luffy's side. With how she was clinging to him like a lifeline, it might not be too long. They were at the door in an instant. Kobe rapped against the solid double wooden doors, the deep sound stemming from it reverberating throughout the silence. They waited for a few seconds, and it was Nami who stepped forth to knock again, much more sharply and forcefully this time. "Hurry and open up, or I swear I'll..." "Hold your horses, lady," a low, rumbling voice groused out from inside, followed by heavy shuffling punctuated by curses every few seconds, and judging by the racket caused, he was probably bumping into furniture and knocking them over. "Don't break my bloody door. It costs a fortune to replace." The doors opened once the sentence was finished, revealing a huge heavy-set man with a giant mustache staring down at them literally with narrowed eyes. He was easily triple Luffy's size and almost double his height. His bulk, however, didn't look that solid. He was more meat than muscle, but his proportions alone was enough to intimidate. Nami's mouth dropped open and she took a step back while Kobe blinked disbelievingly up at the man. Luffy's reaction was to clap his hands in unbridled glee. "You're a giant. How cool." He strode over and poked the man in the side at his waist, as that was where he came up to at level. "So cool. You're bigger than even Gramps." The raven-haired boy gushed with adoration. "Can you teach me how to be as big as you? Do you want to join my crew, giant sir? You have to say yes. He can't fit on our boat, Luffy." "He'll sink the boat, Luffy." Kobe and Nami protested in unison. The Redeed strode over and grabbed her captain by the collar and pulled him off the immobile man, disregarding his whining. "I'm so sorry," Nami apologized sheepishly, "my captain has the tendency to speak his mind without thinking. Please don't take his words seriously." "It's quite alright." Words uttered with a trace of amusement, though his face was still as stoic as ever. "We don't get many travelers as much as before, so we close earlier nowadays." He shook his head. "A real shame. Business has been on the decline ever since that group of vermins arrived. Even the Marines are reluctant to do anything about the activities they engage in. More like they're too afraid, those spineless bastard." His mouth tightened into a grim line momentarily before he smacked his forehead. My, where are my manners? I apologize for my ranting. Come in. I'm getting rusty, what with the lack of customers. Won't want you all getting petrified outside now, would we? My name is Hoof, and I own this humble abode. There's plenty of available rooms. How many nights are you intending to stay here?" "My name's Nami." The Redeed raised her hand. "Pinky's Kobe and that idiot is our captain, Luffy." Hoof nodded in acknowledgement before snaking one long arm around all three of their shoulders. "Be petrified." Kobe piped up meekly as the three of them were ushered inside by the big man. "What do you mean by that?" Hoof closed the door tightly before sliding a few locks in place. He took a few moments to ensure that they were secured in place before giving the pink-haired boy a weird look. "You mean you guys aren't aware of what's going on in this town?" "No," Nami replied, her tone worried, "we just got here." "Ah, I guess that explains why you're still here. Most people who get here don't even stay for more than a few minutes before leaving. I assume you got here after dark." "Yeah. It was already after sunset when we reached here." The innkeeper lumbered over to the wooden counter, not much of a surprise, seeing how almost everything in the inn was made of wood. Cheaper to replace if he broke any of them, Nami guessed, with the evidence of his clumsiness strewn over the floor. Besides for the toppled over chairs and tables, the interior of the inn felt very homely despite being sparsely furnished. It was warm and cozy from the small fireplace at the corner beside a spiraling staircase leading up to the upper floor. The floor was carpeted, the color bland and thinly threaded from usage over the years, but still furry and comfortable beneath their feet. Luffy was already reclining in a padded armchair, totally at home. Hoof knelt down next to the countertop and he let loose another curse which accompanied a sound of solid contact. Bloody drawers and cramped spaces, Nami heard him grumble to himself before he straightened with a thick book in his hands. There was a thin layer of dust on the page he flipped to, and he blew it off, sending it all into the air. "You're the second group of travelers I've had this month. The first also came after dark, and they didn't see the sign." Kobe waved a hand in front of him as if it would make the dust particles disappear. "What sign?" Setting the book onto the table with a resounding thud that echoed around the room, Hoof heaved out a sigh. Hanging his head, he appeared to have an internal conflict with himself for a long while, before raising it with sorrowful eyes. "I guess there's no point withholding this information from you all. You all are stuck here indefinitely anyway." He motioned for Nami and Kobe to keep their questions for later, after seeing how they were on the verge of firing a stream his way. "Let me explain. This island was deemed unsafe for habitation by the world government not long ago. I'm sure you've noticed by now that the night seems, for a lack of a better word, different. More vicious, more alive. Nami and Kobe nodded vigorously. It's like it has a mind of its own, the navigator said softly, irrationally afraid that if she spoke too loudly, the darkness will swallow her in retaliation. It's suspected to be a devil fruit ability. Luffy, who was dozing off beside the fireplace, snapped to full attention. Devil fruit ability? What kind of power is this? Toph lifted his massive shoulders in a sign of helplessness. I'm in the dark on the matter as well, pardon the pun. It definitely has something to do with that pirate crew that recently set up camp here. The Marines have yet to release an official statement as well, though it seems that they're withholding it from us to keep the townspeople from panicking. Many people have fallen ill after being exposed to the darkness for too long, and they're just not right anymore. It's like their very soul has been crushed, leaving behind a skeleton of their former self. The world government is afraid it's contagious, so this island is supposed to be totally cordoned off. Nobody is to leave this island after they arrive here for the time being. Dread settled in the pit of Nami's stomach and made itself comfortable. And how long have you people been quarantined so far? 2 months and counting. So we're stuck here until the matter is solved. Luffy looked way too casual and delighted for Nami's liking, and she headed over to whack him over the head. At least sound a little concerned, would you? She chided while grinding her knuckles against the top of her captain's head, nimbly dodging his swinging arms, trying to extricate himself from her grasp. We could be stuck here for months. She didn't have that kind of time. Arlong was expecting her back soon, and if she didn't make an appearance. Nami didn't want to follow that nauseating train of thought. Oh, let me go, Nami. She did the opposite, applying more force, and Luffy's struggling went up by a magnitude. What's being done to find out about the cause of this problem? What are the Marines of world government up to? We don't know. The dismay was apparent in Huff's tone. Every week, the Marines promise it'll be resolved the next week. But from what I've seen, no progress is being made. I have heard rumors that an admiral has been dispatched here, but it'll take at least a week more for him to arrive. This is ridiculous. Are the Marines here so incompetent that they're unable to help their owning island? Nami raged, and Luffy took advantage of the opportunity to slip out of her hold with a small bout of his power. He appeared on the other side of the room a split second later, and the Redeed released a little exclamation from the minor jolt of energy that passed through her body. The innkeeper's eyes widened. You're a devil fruit user as well. Luffy, steadily avoiding his navigator's scorching glare, smiled at Huff. Yep. I'm an energy man. I've never heard of such a fruit before. Luffy's smile widened. Me neither. But you still ate it. Why would you do that? You'll understand if you spend enough time with him, said Kobe dryly. Huff's expression turned contemplative. He paced back and forth for close to a minute with Kobe and Nami tracking his movement with their eyes tiredly. Luffy had taken up the responsibility of being the one to find something to snack on and was ransacking through the cupboards. His enthusiasm unparalleled, Luffy bounded from one cupboard to another and made quick work of anything edible he could find. It was all fine and dandy, and Huff didn't seem to give a hoot about him turning his inn upside down, but the commotion he was causing grated against Nami's already frazzled nerves. Keep it down, will you, Luffy? Huff startled at the sound of her voice, like he had forgotten that they were in the same room as him. He scrubbed a hand down his face and took a deep breath. I tend to drift off, forgive my foolish tendency. You three are probably tired. He returned behind the counter and gestured for them to gather there. I'll need some of your information as per standard procedure, and for the payment we'll discuss that some other day. He tugged at the collar of his shirt uneasily. There's a town meeting tomorrow morning. Would you come with me? We, need someone of your caliber and skills, Straw Hat Boy. I might not know the full range of your abilities yet, but I'm sure you'll be a big help to us. What do you all say? Nami, all for helping the man solve the issue as soon as possible so they could get back on the road, hesitated in agreeing so readily. Something about his obvious discomfort put her off. What kind of plans do this council have in mind? She asked. The innkeeper cleared his throat bashfully, striking her as a kid caught with his hand down the cookie jar. A team is being assembled to strike back, he replied finally, and there was truth in his words. But we are a small town after all, and traders are fishermen by trade. We don't have anybody remotely strong. Strong enough to stand a chance against the perpetrator, anyway. His wandering eyes landed on their captain. Which is why we'll need you, Luffy. To be frank, I think the mayor knows very well that it's practically suicide to send men in without knowing what we're up against. The team is more likely expected to scout and report their findings. Information is key to victory and all that, you know. Huff grimaced. But the men are fearful. They've lost their will to fight after seeing how some of their fellow friends can no longer be called humans after being exposed to the darkness for an extended period of time. Only a handful of volunteers are on board and the numbers aren't enough. So you want me to rally the townspeople? Show them that all hope is not lost, Luffy deduced, playing with the frayed ends of his straw hat. Exactly. With you leading the team, I'm sure that there'll be more men willing to join it. After you show them a glimpse of what you're capable of. When he didn't get an immediate reply from the raven-haired boy, Hoof quickly backpedaled. I don't mean to impose, and if you don't want to, I guess we can. Their captain laughed. Aang laughed. Let's do it. Kobe was in agreement as well from how he gave Luffy a thumbs up, and Nami found herself being torn between doing what's right and what could possibly endanger all of their lives. All her life, she had always put herself first. It was a survival instinct ingrained in her from young. She would never help others if it meant putting her life at stake. But her captain Luffy went in full speed ahead without caring about the repercussions, so long as he thought it was right. Just like when he saved her from that Sea King. She blew out her resigned breath. Maybe it's time to make a change. She would only be around for a short period of time anyway, might as well earn some good karma to offset whatever bad ones she had garnered so far. And the Sea Devil only knew that she had them in excess. The captain's decision is final. We set out tomorrow. Kobe and Luffy shared a room, while Nami had one to herself for reasons. She had refused to elaborate when Luffy tried to probe further for he, for the life of him, couldn't figure out why they couldn't all just stay in one room together. It'll be more convenient for communication as well as for him to keep an eye on his nakama. Because despite his assumed indifference to the situation, it was all an act to put Nami and Kobe at ease. A facade to not stress them out any further than necessary. He was aware of how they relied on him to tell the severity of the problem more often than not, and Luffy knew with disconcerting clarity that the little predicament they had stumbled into unknowingly was going to blow up in their face very soon. Shit was about to hit the proverbial fan. His powers of energy manipulation allows him to detect the subtle changes in the flow of the matter around him in an area, and the air was saturated with a heavy suffocating magic. It was uncomfortable and choking in its thickness, and also intelligent in the way it constantly shifted and reformed itself. He had utilized his powers to push the surrounding air molecules outwards, creating a sort of barrier between them and the darkness, keeping it at bay, though he kept it a secret from his nakama too. He had a niggling suspicion what the magic would do to them if it had enough time to wear them down mentally upon engulfing them, but he didn't want to ascertain them. It was too risky, and the safety of his crew members always preceded anything else. He also managed to discover that darkness seemingly to come from all directions was in fact only present in a small, albeit highly concentrated quantity. He had sensed the gathering of a dark presence the moment they set foot in town, and it coalesced into the malevolent magic intent on sucking the very life out of them. Luffy suspected that it to be a Loja-type devil fruit much like his, but one that allowed much more freedom and control of its basic element. The user had likely found another use for the devil fruit and might be experimenting it on the unlucky townspeople for its effectiveness. Some things still didn't add up, however, and Luffy hated not being able to put two and two together. Staring up at the rotating fan attached to the ceiling, the raven-haired captain willed for sleep to claim him. Kobe was already snoring quietly beside him, and Luffy was exhausted enough that it should have been easy to fall into a deep slumber, but it continued to evade him like the most frustrating of prey. He was worried, he realized. For the well-being of his friends, for the journey ahead, and all the obstacles they would inevitably face. He hadn't expected to meet any resistance for a while, and to be presented one so early, it just served to remind him that things don't always go according to plan. And more importantly, it's high time to invest some time into coming up with a plan B. It wasn't until the wee hours of the morning did Luffy finally succumb to fatigue, the swirling darkness just beyond the walls, a harsh memory that his problems were only just beginning. The cloaked figure sat in the middle of an abandoned warehouse located at the outskirts of town, entrenched in complete darkness, save for a small light cast by a lit lantern on the uneven cement ground. It was more for his lackey's benefit than his own. The man was able to see perfectly well in the dark. After all, he literally controlled it. The murk looked to be eating away at the solitary light source, battling with it for supremacy. The stream of illumination flickered threateningly as the flame within the lantern performed a slow dance to its increasingly imminent death, much to the panic of the men circling it. There was an outcast among the men, someone who sat a distance away from the rest. His hair was a hue of green, and on his right hip resided 3 swords bundled up with a green haramaki. He didn't seem as bothered as the rest by the gloominess of it all, or maybe it was because of the alcohol he was chugging down at an astonishing rate that dulled his senses. Hushed, agitated whispers filled the silence as trembling hands around the lantern fumbled with a lighter to feed the disappearing flame. Some part of them knew that without that light, they would lose their very sanity. "I've gathered all of you here tonight for a very specific reason, gentlemen." The cloaked figure began to speak, rising from his folded position in a strange manner, like deformed limbs struggling to work in unison and succeeding only partially. His voice was calm, eerily so. "The one we've been waiting for has finally arrived. And he is strong. Oh, he is so strong. He might even be strong enough to be the final ingredient the Mizrahantas need." An inhumane cackle that had their hair all on end, though the mere mention of the legendary group of barbaric pirates would already have sufficed. "Capture him. Bring him to me." The gust of wind snagged the hood of the man shrouded in shadows and pulled it back to reveal their boss that had hired them. The bounty hunters only saw his visage for a split second before darkness descended over him once again, but it was an image that would forever haunt them in their sleep. "His name is Luffy D. Monkey. I want him alive. You're up early." Luffy didn't even spare the familiar feminine voice a glance, having heard the creaking of the stairs when Nami was making her way down slowly. And if that wasn't enough, he was also aware of the movement in the air and energy, shifting from one form to another in her wake. In the beginning, when Luffy had just acquired his powers, the sensory overload gave him a massive headache as he was unable to digest the information fast enough. It was always at the forefront of his thoughts and highly disturbing. Every small movement by anything in a small radius around him was registered by his improved senses in such excruciating detail, it hindered his normal thought processes. He learned quickly how to push them all to the back of his mind and file them away for reviewing in the future. Now, the information buildup was more like static in the background to him, gradually getting louder over time as more and more was hoarded away. This methodical mental procedure he had gotten accustomed to affected his daily life as well. He found that he got more tidy and organized with his belongings, and his outlook on problem solving morphed to a step-by-step approach. He was becoming more rational. Calculative. It felt strange to gauge the consequences of his every move, to ruminate about the possible backlash and how to minimize it. So just like with his powers, he actively blocked that part out unless the situation called for it. Where was the fun in acting without impulse? "Couldn't sleep," Luffy replied, admiring the sunrise through a window that turned the sky a few gorgeous shades of orange and scarlet. Above it all, he liked how it chased away the shadows. His brain dimly matched the color with Nami's head of hair, a fierce fiery red as it caught and shone in the light. "Unlike you. Slept like a log, huh?" The sound of shuffling and cupboards being opened. "I don't think I've slept better in my life," said Nami honestly. Luffy swiveled to look at Nami and stopped in his tracks. The words he wanted to say died in his throat at the image of the redhead in a form-fitting short-sleeved top with a deep V and a barely there pair of shorts that left little to imagination, tiptoeing on both feet and one hand on the counter for balance, the other extended upwards to reach for a mug sitting on the top shelf. Her lips were puckered into a frown, and her ample was straining against its confines in a way that made his body feel uncomfortably hot. Her fully stretched position brought his attention to the generous curve of her ass and mile-long legs, her pale skin almost luminescent in the soft morning light seeping through the window. Luffy blinked thrice in quick succession to clear his suddenly foggy mind, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to shift his eyes off her. It was like he was hypnotized by the movements of her supple body, and there was a foreign stirring below his waist, in a region that had remained dormant for his whole life until now. The sensation was strange and disconcerting in its intensity, but not wholly unpleasant. In fact, as it spread across his body, he was consumed by a sudden wave of desire to touch and discover for himself if her skin was as soft and yielding as it seemed. Clenching her fists tightly by his side to fight the irrational compulsion, Luffy watched as she expelled a huff of irritation when her hand continued to brush the loop of the mocking cup just out of her reach. Finally, she threw her hands up in surrender and glanced at him. "Could you please help me get that cup, Luffy? I can't reach it." He nodded mutely, not trusting his voice at the moment. Walking over, he easily snatched the cup off the shelf and handed it over to the redhead. Nami smiled, winked and skipped over to the sink to fill it with water. "Thanks, Captain." After a long, satisfying drag, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. While washing the cup, she whirled her head back and said, "Do you think it's safe to go out now? I'm hungry and you definitely are too. Wanna grab?" She halted mid-sentence when she noticed that Luffy was no longer beside the window. Drying her hands with a towel, she frowned at her captain's straw hat hanging forlornly from the windowsill, the only proof that he had been there before. Did she say or do something wrong? Maybe it was her breath. Blowing into her palm, she took a whiff and cringed. Nami hurried off to rectify the problem, stopped in her tracks, returned and grabbed the straw hat before resuming on her way to the toilet. Silence. The meeting shall only commence when there is absolute silence in the room. The tiny old man with an impressive graying beard who introduced himself as Rasfer banged his hand against the table repeatedly until the conversation and murmurs died down to a more manageable level. Luffy chuckled to himself when Rasfer grimaced and rubbed his hands together. He and his crew had been roused from their sleep. He had went back to catch some Z's after his run-in with Nami sometime before lunch to wash up and prepare for the meal. Not expecting too grand an affair, Luffy was shocked when a 10-course meal greeted him in the dining area. The two other members had been equally taken aback, but it was quickly ditched aside in favor of filling their grumbling tummies. Hoof explained that it was the least he could do as a sign of gratitude for their willingness to take on the job. After all of them discovered their physical limitations imposed on them by their digestive system, the crew was whisked off to attend the meeting. It was held at the mayor's abode in a spacious empty multi-purpose room. A long table had been set up, along with seats of varying height and sturdiness that were placed at the side. By the time they had arrived, the discussion was already in full swing, and with a contrite tilt of his head towards the people Luffy assumed to be his fellow council members, Hoof had hurriedly veered them to their seats at the far end of the table. Only when each and every one of the council had been accounted for did the official meeting begin. At that moment, Nami leveled a stare his way that commanded him to behave, but there was a ghost of a smile on her lips as well. Her very plump able cherry red. The raven-haired boy coughed into his fist and swung his eyes back to Rasfer. He didn't know what to make of this newfound attraction towards his crewmate, and that's what it was, lust. He had read about that sometime during his childhood in some age-old classic he had unearthed from Makino's expansive collection. Two lovers tragically torn apart due to their family's stubborn beliefs, they had eloped together and fornicated on many occasions to express their bottomless love for each other. He hadn't understood what the words nor illustrations meant at that time, but he was now seeing things from an entirely new perspective that had never occurred to his young and innocent mind. The very idea of performing such an intimate act with the pretty Redeed made his cheeks heat up and his to twitch in anticipation. When he had asked for a challenge, he never expected this to be it. From what little he knew about women, a microscope might not even be able to discern it. He understood that they took proclamations of love very seriously. Furthermore, they only partook in such prurient and indecent activities after a declaration of engagement or marriage. He had also heard rumors that some women took their maidenhood to their graves as they couldn't find a man they deemed suitable to lose it to. It was all very vexing. Luffy couldn't begin to fathom why it was such a big deal. According to the book, it was just a form of physical release, though it was apparently incredibly pleasurable. He figured it was akin to defecation. The relief he associated it with wasn't something to scoff at. So what's the big deal? Perhaps he should inquire Nami about it sometime soon. Get it off his mind so he won't be so distracted by it. Maybe he'll also understand why he wanted to touch her so badly. But that settled, Luffy gave his undivided attention to Rasfer, who had, unbeknownst to him, already started the ball rolling. "It's getting worse," he was saying, "we've lost another 3 this week. At this rate, there'll be nothing left of this town in 2 months. He raised both hands, one of the palm reddened from recurring contact with the tabletop, to quell the descent before it gathered in volume. "We have 2 choices at this point. Either we fight back to the best of our ability or we wait for the Marines to come to our rescue." The erupting jeers and curses thrown out by the crowd the moment the Marines were mentioned were answer enough. The Marines are all talk. They don't care about our livelihood at all. No better than common thugs, I say, a wiry old man spat, brandishing his walking stick like a weapon, hitting a few people around him with his callous swinging. "Agreed. We should stop sitting around and take initiative. Either way, we're already 1 foot in our coffins." Hoof was the one who offered this contribution. Most, if not all of those present, inclined their heads in concurrence with the innkeeper's statement. "Are you all fools?" A medium-built teenager no older than Luffy demanded, shooting up from his seated position in agitation. "We are just courting death if we were to go after those pirates alone. They're not ordinary people, if you haven't noticed. They possess powers beyond our wildest dreams and aren't afraid to use it. Any team we send in will perish for certain. Are you really going to just allow the death toll to rise, old man, for no reason?" Rasfer bristled at the challenge in the youngster's tone. "Watch your words, Money. You may be a part of the council because of your grandfather's last wish, but what?" He sneered, "I'm too young to try to prevent you from destroying the town my grandfather built from scratch. The longer we wait, the more casualties we suffer. We should make a move while we still have the strength." "There you go, jumping to conclusions again. Are your brains even functional anymore?" Money wagged his index finger in a condescending manner. "The situation is under control. As long as we keep indoors after dark, nothing will happen to us. Those imbeciles deserve it for wandering outside even though they had been warned." Rasfer's eyes flashed black. "Why, you disrespectful little." "Then what do you suggest, Money?" Hoof fed in. "Oh, break apart the heated debate. We're open to any idea as long as it's feasible." There was a long drawn-out stretch of fretful noiselessness, no doubt on purpose by Money, who ran his tongue over his teeth. "It's very simple actually. We wait it out. This is some strong magic at work here, but whoever is behind this can't possibly keep it up forever. Eventually, he or she will tire. And by then, the Admiral will definitely be here to tie up any loose ends. Nobody else has to be needlessly sacrificed. This could take months." The old man from before rebuked, his walking stick pointed at his younger comrade threateningly. It spoke volumes about their camaraderie or lack thereof. You are naive and immature, Money. You might grow up to be a capable leader in the future, but right now you are a pest who fails to look beyond the immediate future. Money wasn't provoked. Instead, he smiled calmly. Preach as much as you want to while you still can, geezer. Your expiration date is close anyway. The sketchy warning issued, he went ahead to address the remaining members. It seems like we are at an impasse. Let me remind all of you to choose the side you take wisely, because the fate of the town as well as the lives of you and your family are at stake. I hope most of you aren't intellectually challenged and are able to see the truth in my words. Having said his piece, Money took his leave without a backward glance, but not before bowing sarcastically to the mayor in farewell. Shock rendered most of the council speechless, so there was complete stillness for a brief moment before the animated chattering resumed with more gusto than before. Everybody was throwing out their thoughts, talking over each other in an attempt to be heard. It was a total mess, and any effort made towards reining in the conversation was ineffective, as there was an undertone of panic among the attendees. And panic had a way of turning the most level-headed individuals into primitive mammals that acted on instinct, spurring them to make unprecedentedly rash decisions. Luffy, oblivious to the chaos around him, yawned loud enough for everybody to stop and gape at his lack of poise. He yawned so hard droplets of tears were squeezed out from his eyes, and he rubbed at it with one hand, the other preoccupied with the task of excavating his ear. The image was so Luffy-ish Nami almost burst out laughing. Almost, but no. Nami hid her face in her hands out of blistering mortification and a need to pretend that in a perfect world, if she willed hard enough, she will find herself in the middle of her house back at Kokoyashi village when the heat receded from her face. Kobe made a small strangled sound beside her, and cautiously, she peeked out from in between her fingers to find out what idiocy Luffy had engaged in next. He was now fully sprawled out on his chair with both of his legs propped up on the table, his feet still clad in the sandals. He wriggled his toes belatedly, and the petite lady opposite him wrinkled her nose in disdain and sashayed over to fill Money's now empty seat. Ah, that was a nice nap. Luffy gave the flabbergasted onlookers a contented smile. What did I miss? Nami elbowed him in the side sharply. Shut up, she hissed. Who is this kid, hoof? Rasfer asked the innkeeper sternly, you should know very well that no outsiders are allowed within this four walls. They should be removed immediately. Hoof came to their rescue before any of them could be bullied out. They're my guests. His narrowed eyes dared the two burly men that were approaching the crew to take any steps further. They skidded to a stop. And I think it's about time I explain my plan to you all. Don't be hasty and take any sides just yet, hear me out, and then we can take a vote. This boy here, he patted Luffy on the shoulder, causing him to jerk up in surprise and topple the entire chair over with him, is a devil fruit user. He sighed and spread his arms out, palms up. He might not look like much what. Following the direction of their widened eyes and muffled gasps, Huff took a long moment to take in the scene before him that defied the very laws humans were bound by. Luffy, looking mildly miffed by the inconvenience, was still lying on the chair, but the chair itself appeared to be supported by an apparition of some sort as it had stopped in the midst of pitching over in an angle he once considered impossible. The back of the chair was only inches from meeting the marble floor, so close it was almost parallel. And then, slowly but surely, the chair tilted back upwards with Luffy still on it, yawning away as if such an incident happened on a daily basis for him. This caused a number of council members to vault to their feet in amazement, craning their necks for a better view. When the chair righted itself back to its original position, Hoof couldn't wait a single second more before he said, that's exactly what I mean by he has powers. His name is Luffy, and he has agreed to help us lead a team to find the person causing the problem, getting rid of him or her if he's able to. Rasfer was the first to recover from the stupor, his expression guarded, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes that wasn't there before. You're way too optimistic, Hoof, he said, eyeing Luffy intently, how's an ability like that going to help us? It seems more like a magic trick rather than anything remotely effective enough to dispel the magic, much less bring down the culprit. Kobe was up on his feet in a flash to defend his captain. You have no idea what he's capable of. Don't belittle him. Luffy laughed and ambled over, clapping his friend good-naturedly on the back hard enough that he nearly careened over the table. Ah, don't worry, Kobe. It's all good. He angled his head at the mayor and subsequently the rest of the council members who seemed to be reassessing him. Like my crew member said. I might not seem like much, but I'm more than qualified for this job. I'll be able to defeat whoever's responsible. You can take my word for it. Hoof was the next to gather back his wits. This is the best chance we'll ever have, people. How often do we have new visitors in town now? And the odds of someone who has a devil fruit power coming here? Even lesser. We have to strike now while we stand a chance, he implored. I'm with Hoof on this, a pretty woman with blonde curls on the plump side cut in, having been quiet the entire time until now. Her opinion apparently carried a decent amount of weight as all whispering ceased. She had everybody's utmost attention. I think I'm speaking for everyone present here when I say that we've all lost someone close to us to this revolting magic. Don't we all want to take our revenge? A middle-aged man with a humongous belly disagreed. Not at the cost of more lives, Vina. The woman known as Vina Sked. Are you hearing yourself, Mono? Where did all that bravado from last week go to? It died with my brother. A flat reply. Someone coughed and it filled the awkward silence. Then, we all lost someone, Mono, Vina reminded him gently, and then looked around the room. We have to do this to avoid losing any more. Defense is the best defense, and normally I wouldn't agree with this, but when you're drowning and a lifeline presents itself in front of you, shouldn't you reach out and continue struggling to survive, rather than letting yourself sink? Mono lowered his head with a heavy sigh. When you put it like that. I'm in. Me too. One by one, the council members voiced out their approval for the plan, until there was only one person left. Vina's gaze softened visibly when she looked at him. Broomy, Vina prompted in a reverent tone, her respect evident. We have all the votes we need. But your consent will mean a lot to us. And if you don't manage to take down the culprit? The walking stick old man asked bluntly, critically, staring at Luffy. I have to play the devil's advocate here, unfortunately. The worst case scenario is you lose. The entire team we send gets wiped out. The town will be at their mercy. Why should we trust you, stranger? Luffy pushed himself off his perch on the table. It's really simple, old man. I made a promise to someone long ago. He took off the straw hat on his head and clutching it close to his, he bowed deeply to him. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to be the next pirate king. In order to do that. He grinned widely. I refuse to lose. They set off at the crack of dawn. The slanted rays of gold that peeked over the horizon, however weak, chased away the gloom of last night's darkness. The town had the subdued quiet typically associated with the early hours of morning, but Luffy could still feel an underlying menace beneath the layers of silence. It was slowly making way, pulling back with reluctance as the growing illumination chipped away at it. A rising ball of fire filled the sky with splashes of red and yellow, the clouds with rays of pink. The rivers and lakes were bathed in brilliant gold, leaving the group speechless with its beauty. Nami actually stopped and stared, spellbound for a long moment till Kobe nudged her with his shoulder to move her along. She allowed herself to be dragged by him, just so she could stare a while longer. The trio were joined by only one of the townsfolk, his sole purpose of tagging along to be their guide through the dense forest at the edge of town that led to where the concentration of magic was at its strongest. The devil fruit appraiser of the town couldn't pinpoint the exact location, but it identified the area, a circle of radius roughly 50 meters or so. Brasfer had offered to send along more men, strength in numbers, he had insisted, but Luffy had declined and would not budge on his decision. He reasoned that he was more comfortable with his current crew, and if things did go awry, he didn't want his hands to be stained red from the blood spilled. He will ensure protection of his crew, but might not be able to extend the same assurance to the townsfolk. After all, his foremost duty was to his crew members, and them only. We're here. The wiry young man reported to him when they reached the end of the road, looking nervous and jittery. The forested area begins just north of here. I wish you all the best, Mr. Luffy. We will be waiting for your return with good news. He hightailed out of there with impressive speed for his stature. Well. Kobe tugged at his neckerchief uncomfortably, staring after the disappearing figure with envious eyes. We still have a distance to go, and this place already gives me the creeps. Let's get it over with then, Nami grumbled, hefting the bag of supplies higher over her shoulder. The faster we bring down that fella, the faster we can get out of here. Lighten up, guys. Think of this as a field trip into the unknown. Luffy said cheerfully, walking energetically off the marked path and onto the unkempt dense long grass that tickled at their bare ankles. Nami didn't deign that absurd suggestion worthy of a reply of any kind, so she kept her mouth shut. Kobe wasn't on the same page as her. How could you be so chipper about this? We could actually die, Luffy. Remember what the devil fruit appraiser said. It reeks of danger and malice, and they're hardly wrong. The Barudians were virtually never wrong with their appraisals, a skill they have fine-tuned throughout the ages as a necessity for survival in their homeland. He wasn't certain of anything else past that piece of information, that little nugget being all he managed to get out of Shanks, his former captain, had been strangely tight-lipped regarding the descendants of the ancient tribe. That's what makes things interesting. That's also how people die, Kobe snapped. I'm sorry, Captain, but you have this knack for walking headfirst into danger without caution, and one of these days, it's going to cause all of us our lives. But not today. Luffy favored him with a lopsided grin. I have a good feeling about today. What kind of good feeling? Nami asked, instantly wary. It's not that she didn't trust her captain. As a matter of fact, she trusted him explicitly, at least with regards to protection. She knew without a shred of doubt that she was in good hands and no harm will befall her as long as he's around. It wasn't like her to place so much faith in someone she hardly knew, but Luffy just elicited such a reaction. It simply felt right. Still, his premonitions were a cause for concern, mainly due to his poor judgment that rears its head time and time again. I don't know how to describe it. The raven-haired captain whistled leisurely. There's something in the air that tells me things are going to go our way today. Kobe wasn't convinced in the slightest, and he made it apparent by picking up several twigs lying around and sticking them into the moist soil every few feet as they traversed further into the jungle as markings. He also dug the end of the stick deep into the ground and drew a line connecting the vertical sticks as a plan B in the event of a mishap that dislodges one, breaking the chain. He smiled somewhat shyly when he noticed Nami peering at him. In case we have to make a run for it, he explained, holding one of his last few apparatuses out. Always good to be well prepared. She agreed wholeheartedly. Despite her captain's assurances, she still felt apprehensive and on edge with nervous energy, and every so often, she turned back to check that nobody was following them. She couldn't shake off the impression that they were being watched, and it was wreaking havoc on her senses already working overtime. As they progressed deeper forward to their destination, the foliage got exponentially thicker, obscuring their field of vision and forcing Luffy in front to start bashing through the heavy leafage to make a path for them. To make matters worse, the girth of the protruding branches were phenomenal and unyielding, in line with the abnormally giant vegetation. The thorns and barbs cut into every inch of their exposed skin, draining their vitality slowly but surely. If the choice of location in the middle of the forest was a calculated form of deterrence, it was definitely doing the trick. Are we there yet? Luffy called out without looking back, fanning himself with a large leaf he had plucked out. This is boring. We're not exactly having fun back here either, Luffy, Nami grumbled, unraveling the map in her hands. Without any prominent landmark to determine their exact bearings, she could only estimate where they were by the speed they were walking and how much time had passed. Shouldn't be far off now. Actually, if I'm right, it should just be around the corner. Stop right there, Straw Hat. Luffy halted and stared incredulously at the leaf in his hand. You can talk cool. Why didn't you do that earlier? Nami and Kobe ignored their captain's cringe-worthy reaction to pinpoint the source of the voice for themselves, which was a long-haired man on the upper branches of a tree with a pistol aimed directly at Luffy. I'm up here, you idiot. He screamed. Snickers came from above in all directions, and Nami gasped when she realized that they were surrounded by similarly dressed men atop of different trees. They had a bird's-eye view of the area and weapons all at the ready to fire and incapacitate, leaving them severely disadvantaged. Beside her, Kobe tensed and untied his neckerchief from his collar, retying it around his right wrist. He gave it a few tugs to verify that it's secure, a severe look on his face as he returned his gaze to the unwanted guests. Luffy finally oriented himself and spotted the man above him. Oh, there you are. I didn't expect to find anybody else here. He frowned. Why are you up so high? It's hard to talk to you like this. The grin slowly spread across the man's face, one full of malice and killing intention. I guess it's a good thing that we're not here to talk then. Allow me to introduce myself, my name is Audrin. I'm a bounty hunter that has single-handedly taken down multiple pirates with bounties as high as 5 million Beely. He looked immensely proud of that feat. You're next, Monkey D. Luffy. Prepare to feel the coldness of death. Their captain blinked up at the man, confusion in every line of his creased forehead. For someone who doesn't want to talk, you sure do talk a lot. The bounty hunter's eye twitched. Why, you little brat, he leveled his pistol, his finger curling around the trigger. Let's see if you can still be snarky when you're dead. Nami screamed just as a deafening bang filled the air. Get out of the way, Luffy. She watched in abject horror as Luffy stood motionless for a few seconds, shadows cloaking his expression. There was no visible entry wound or splatter of blood, and if she wasn't mistaken, Luffy didn't even waver the slightest, which was impossible if the bullet had hit the impact would have sent him stumbling back at the very least. Could the bounty hunter have missed? Then, as if in response to her musings, the person in question cursed loudly. What the hell? Did I miss? Impossible. He glared at Luffy's form and fired off another few shots one after another quickly, shouting die in tandem with each bullet. The rapid volley sent up a plume of dust around the raven-haired boy, and Nami covered her mouth with both hands to stop a squeal of dismay before it escaped. No human could have survived that. A satisfied smirk on Audrin's lips, he turned his attention to the two of them. Nami could feel her legs trembling, but she forced herself to remain strong. If she was going to go down, she wasn't about to make it easy for these bastards. Kobe didn't look concerned about their captain's well-being at all. Don't count him out just yet, he advised, pointing at where Luffy was standing a moment ago. You'll need much more than that to even scratch him. And as the dust settled, Luffy emerged in one piece, yawning and rolling his shoulders forward nonchalantly. Nami's expression corresponded to that of Audrin, blatant disbelief. The relief wasn't reflected on his face, however. That was all on her. That's all. I'm disappointed. He smiled, tilting his straw hat at the dumbfounded bounty hunter. Now, allow me to introduce myself. And unlike you, Luffy cracked his knuckles and hunched down slightly. I talk with my fists. He pushed off the ground and all hell broke loose. Nami too sighed, one of the many unconscious bounty hunters, with disgust after failing to find any money on him. Again. Did none of these people ever heard of a wallet? Heck, she'll even settle for some spare change at this point, anything to reward her efforts like stuffing her hand down their sticky pockets. They called themselves bounty hunters yet they didn't have a single cent on them. Outrageous. You could have left some for me. Kobe's sulky voice. I wanted to have some fun too. I might have went overboard, Luffy conceded, bending over to slap Audrin on his cheeks. He stirred with a groan, peeling back his eyes slowly. They widened instantly when he realized who he was next to, and the bounty hunter tried to slither away. Kobe snatched up one of his legs and held it up, stopping him from getting away, but that didn't stop him from trying. Audrin tired quickly though, the futility of his efforts dawning on him, and he sagged to the ground. Kill me. Save me the humiliation. Luffy laughed. Why would I want to kill you? I only introduced myself to you. All I want is some directions. Audrin stared at him with distrust. You're just going to let me go? Yep. And the rest of my men? Yep. You don't want anything from me? All I want is directions. Oh, and why you attacked me for no reason. Nami cut in before Audrin could reply as she walked over to join them. Excuse me. Actually, some gold would be nice. My captain did spare your miserable lives, so I think it's only right if you express your gratitude in money. Nami, your eyes, they're dollar signs. Are you okay? Kobe asked. I'm fine. We don't need any more money, Nami, Luffy protested, you have so much in that bag of yours. Mine. Nami growled, and the animalistic sound had Kobe stepping backward in surprise and Audrin cowering with a subdued yelp. Luffy scratched his head. Don't even think about touching that. And let me just inform you, you can never have enough money, she reprimanded Luffy and sent a scathing look the bounty hunter's way. He threw his hands up into the air in surrender. You can have all of it. Every last cent. She showed her appreciation with a brief smile. Thank you for being so understanding. Her expression darkened. Get the money for me. Now. Right away, ma'am. Audrin leapt into action, moving like he was being chased by a bloodthirsty wolf pack. Just wait here. But he hadn't told us where to. Luffy, Nami interrupted with a beatific smile so wide that even Luffy's rusty sense of self-preservation kicked into gear to save him from being steamrolled over by feminine fury. Whatever it is, it can wait. Money can't. You understand why now, don't you? He gulped and nodded. Wonderful. Now get to work and help that bounty hunter out. The faster I mean we get the money, the better. She patted his cheek slightly and motioned for him to go. Luffy nodded mutely again and trudged after Audrin, who was sprinting around from body to body like a headless chicken. Kobe was nowhere to be seen. That asshole. The trio were back on their way soon enough, armed with knowledge of the base. Audrin had been more than happy to pass it up, saying that he wanted nothing to do with the person that hired him, and a bag stuffed full of gold which Nami tasked Kobe to lug along, quoting his little disappearing act when she needed him most when he tried to negotiate with her. Of course, he failed. Be careful with all that money, Kobe. Nami warned, staring pointedly at the way he was dragging the grossly swollen sack along the ground, over tiny rocks, and scraping audibly against the sand gathering in quantity as they approached the shore on the other end of the island. That's all min ours and we won't want it spilling out all over the place. I'm trying, Kobe insisted, out of breath and winded. He hadn't felt this tired since Shank's training session all that years back, and that was something he didn't want to relive without a doubt. But damn it all, this thing weighed a ton. He wasn't going to sling it over his shoulder, that's for sure. Not without suffering major skeletal and muscular damage, anyway. How much is in the sack anyway? Nowhere near enough, Nami answered simply, truthfully. Are you sure? The pink-haired boy grunted in exertion as the sack snagged on a low-lying branch, and he had to heave it with all his strength to escape its thorny clutches. Because it sure feels like there's enough in there to solve world hunger once and for all. I know, isn't that great? And it's all mine. There was a long lapse in conversation before Nami amended her words, laughing nervously. Ours, I mean. I would never dream of taking it all for myself. Right. Kobe snorted. Are you sure we can't just leave it here? We could bury it here beneath some weed and sand so we can come back and collect it later. Nami halted in her track so abruptly Kobe screeched to a stop to avoid bumping into her rear. She then slowly turned around and pinned him with a scowl that would have given Medusa herself a run for her money. He was surprised he could still move his limbs. Kobe, she began, her voice low and threatening, a gleam in her eyes that had him holding his hands out in front of him to protect himself. I could also skin you alive, boil you and have a sumptuous meal for dinner. But I won't. Do you know why? I don't think I want to know. Heedless of his reply, Nami continued. Because there are some things that should never be considered. And leaving behind money is one of them. Her eyes narrowed. Do you understand? He sighed. Fine. Good. Now let's go. Time's a-wasting. Back to her normal affable self, Nami skipped off to where her captain was spearheading their advance with a map in his hands, and even from where he was standing, Kobe could see that it was upside down. Sighing again and cursing all the sea devils for his luck with crewmates, he bent down and wrapped his hands around the mouth of the sack and resumed the Herculean task of moving it to their destination. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Peanut Butter Jello for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.